So good morning. Thank you for coming to our training this year, and I'll open up the floor for the District Attorney Steve Wright to start the open meeting law presentation.
All right, good morning, everybody.
Near the
Steve Wright.
microphone.
Can everybody hear me okay? Online?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. So I'll go ahead and get started. I cover the open meeting law portion this morning. Those of you who have attended the training before, you'll see it's very similar to what I've talked about in the past. The training objectives, just to give you an overview of the open meeting law, some of the issues that we see from time to time, questions that come up by various boards, and then some of the resources that are available to you if you want to research the issue further. The legislature adopted the open meeting law many years ago, and the purpose of it is just to make sure that the public's business is conducted openly. And so that's the one thing you want to remember as we go through this presentation and as you conduct your meetings on the various boards and commissions. Key points: actions taken openly, deliberations openly, and everything's done in the public. This is a case from the Nevada Supreme Court back in 2003, just reiterating what the legislature's told us, that we want to promote openness in government. Unless you're the legislature, by the way, but that's a separate issue. All right, so some important things to remember: the open meeting law doesn't prohibit all private discussions of a public issue by members of a public body or forbid lobbying for votes. All of you that are on boards know that people approach you from time to time, ask you questions, those sorts of things. You're not prohibited from answering those questions.
I need to share.
And that's,
I forgot to step.
oh,
Sorry. My apologies running around. I forgot to share the screen here. Let me get out of here. Escape.
okay, so I was saying it doesn't prohibit every public discussion, and you're approached by people, you talk about issues. That's part of your job as a board member. You just need to be careful that you're not sharing that information with other board members, resulting in deliberations on issues that are coming before the board without having a meeting. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the program. A quick checklist for you. This is kind of what Aaron uses, everybody uses when we're figuring out the agenda. Is it done correctly? And is everything on the agenda? You know, is the board subject to the open meeting law? That's not a question for any of us. All the boards in Lyon County are subject to the open meeting law. Is it a meeting, or is there going to be a quorum present? Has it been noticed? Is there an agenda? Is there deliberation? Is there a provision for public comment? And has any action been taken? This just talks a little bit about when the open meeting law applies, and it applies to any administrative, legislative, advisory, or executive body of the state or local government. And so that covers really all the boards that are established by Lyon County. Some of the other information about which boards are covered by the open meeting law: any body that's established by a statute of the state, library boards, county commissions, planning commissions, any body created by an ordinance of the county, CABs, citizen advisory boards, Lyon County and Animal Services Advisory Board. Those kinds of boards are created by ordinance. Committees and subcommittees, that often comes up. You have maybe a big project you're working on, or you want to consider, and you want to appoint a committee to do some legwork, come back with recommendations. Those committees are subject to the open meeting law. It used to be that, it was one way to make things streamlined, easier. You didn't have to do all the open meeting law requirements, but they've now made it clear that if you're going to have a committee that's going to come back, gather information, come back and make recommendations to the board in whole, that committee is going to be subject to the open meeting law. So something to be aware of. If you have questions on that, always reach out in an abundance of caution to Aaron or to the DA's office, just to make sure that it's not going to be subject to the open meeting law. This is in 2019, they clarified the committee, and it's 2 persons appointed by a public body if that committee or working group is authorized to make recommendations to the public body. A little bit more on committees. If your committee is helping the board and going to make recommendations, just make sure that you agendize their meetings just as you would for the regular board. Quorum. The quorum's important in the open meeting law because if you don't have a quorum, you don't have a meeting. And so the open meeting law applies to the meetings. A quorum is, generally speaking, a majority of the board. If the board members are elected officials, it has to be a majority of the elected officials. That makes sense. You have a 5-person board, quorum is 3. You need 3 present. If it's an elected board, you have to have the majority, and in order to approve an item, it has to be a majority of those elected officials. So it's a little bit different for elected versus appointed boards. Any questions on quorums? Pretty straightforward. Sometimes we do see issues where you can't get a quorum at the meeting. And so what do? Do you hold the meeting anyways, let the public participate, have your discussions, all that sort of thing? We recommend you don't do that. If you don't have a quorum present, cancel the meeting. Just a little bit more on the quorum issue. You just always want to make sure you have a quorum before you hold the meeting. Audio visual requirements, and this comes up frequently now. A lot more remote meetings, and you need to provide the capability for remote meetings. Not all the boards in the county are able to do that. So you need to be careful about how you use that equipment and whether you're doing remote meetings, just to make sure that you meet the requirements. So I'll go through that a little bit more as we move through here. If you have questions as we're going, if I'm going too fast, raise your hand, let me know. I'm trying to run through it a little bit quickly, and then at the end we can have questions and discussions as need be. The serial briefings, a meeting, I talked a little bit about this when you're dealing with private discussions and things, and this is something that everybody needs to be cautious about. And what it is it's where you end up talking to some of your fellow board members, and you basically are making the decision outside the meeting. What do you think about this issue? I think it's a great idea. Then you go to another board member. What do you think about this issue? It's a great idea. Well, board member 1 said it's also a great idea. Suddenly you're deliberating towards that decision, sharing information with the board, and doing that outside the meeting. So you need to be careful. You can have private discussions, but you can't lead to making that decision outside of the meeting. This is something that comes up from time to time. You need to be careful about it. So the way it works is you have less than a quorum at any individual meeting. And then you attend more than one of those meetings, and the series ends up that you've had a majority of the board make a decision on an item. Some of the things that come up that we see causes the DA's office a lot of concern. Email, especially social media now has become a little bit of a challenge because you can do the same thing that you used to do in person or on the telephone. You can do it by email. And so one of the things that really concerns us is emails that go to like the whole board. And then there's a response to everybody. And you can get yourself in trouble because you may be deciding an issue, just not thinking about it, responding to an email, this is what's going on. Pretty soon you have a chain of emails that's already made the decision. And so we urge you to be cautious when you're emailing your fellow board members. Really, you should work through, if you have somebody who's a staff person, you should work with that person, not through the board, because we want to avoid any appearance that there's been a discussion outside the meeting, or we especially want to avoid any decision. The Del Papa case back in 1998 was the case that sort of brought to light this serial communication. And so what happened in that case, Nancy Price, a regent, made comments to the press criticizing decisions that the board of trustees had made, the regents. And several other regents expressed concerns about those comments. And so pretty standard scenario, right? Somebody on the board says something, some other board members maybe don't agree. And then so the chair met with the public information officer, asked that she draft a response to the comments. Went to a staff person, as we would expect to do, and said, hey, can you help us out with this? Yes, that's all fine, right? And then what happened is they prepared that response and sent it to all the board members. And said it would not be published until approved by the board. Requested feedback, and several of the board members responded. Okay, the press release actually never issued the response that the chair actually wanted to do. And the attorney general filed a complaint in that case. What does everybody think? Violation of the open meeting law? Yeah, violation of the open meeting law because they made a decision on an issue before the board outside of any public meeting. Even though they didn't come to publish the press release or anything, get to the finish line, they still violated the open meeting law by convening as a group outside of a public meeting. And so that's just something everybody needs to be careful, especially in today's day and age where there's a lot of stuff done on the computer, really easy to get in emails and chains and things. You think you're responding just to maybe a constituent. Actually, all your fellow board members are on that same email. You hit reply all, you respond, and pretty soon there's a majority of your board has responded to that email with the decision. Likely that could be an open meeting law violation. This is a little summary of the decision that you, when you're meeting, even if it's not in a meeting setting, if it has the end result of being a decision, just as if it were a meeting, it's going to violate the open meeting law. There's some exceptions to that. Most boards don't come in contact with these exceptions. One is attorney-client privilege, that you can have attorney-client communications that are not public and that are not subject to the open meeting law. There's a few other things, some labor negotiations, other things that do not have to be done in public for reasons that are separate from the open meeting law. The ways you can hold a meeting, everybody knows you can hold meetings by telephone, video conference, remote technology. We don't hold really meetings by telephone in Lyon County. We don't encourage that. Video conference is not common and available either. Remote technology, though, is used frequently in Lyon County. COVID-19 kind of changed the practice. Used to always be you had to have a physical location for your meeting. That is no longer the case in Nevada. At that time, the governor allowed remote meetings, and in 2021, the legislature made these changes permanent. The summary of what's allowed: you can conduct a meeting using a remote technology system. It changed the notice requirements. Now, it used to be you had to post at 3 locations in the county or the area where your board served, and at the location of the meeting, and at the principal place of the business, if there was one. Now you just have to post at the principal place and online, the county and state website. If it is an elected body, there must be a physical location for the meeting. If it's not elected, you don't need to have a physical location for the meeting. In Lyon County, we still require you to have a physical location. All the cabs and all the boards basically do have a place where they're scheduled to meet. And so we still ask that you make that available in Lyon County. The things that have to happen, usually the county uses Zoom for the remote technology meetings, but you have to have a system that allows live public comments. And you have to be able to hear and talk through that remote technology. The agenda posting requirements are still the same. We'll get into that a little bit as we go through the presentation. I think everybody's pretty familiar with remote meetings, probably participated in them, but very common these days. And it's beneficial for certainly for Lyon County, since it's so spread out. People can attend meetings without necessarily having to travel to the different locations. I talk a little bit about this because I think it's changed a lot how we conduct business, not only at the county, but in our lives in general. But social media and electronic communication can be challenging for boards because just a lot happens on social media and texting and that sort of thing. And you just need to be cautious to make sure that if that's going on, that it's not running afoul of your obligations under the open meeting law. It's also important to know that what we want to do with the boards is, we post the agenda, we provide the backup, and we hopefully give, if it's an item that somebody's asking the board to approve, that person has the information that's available to the board members. And a lot of times social media, internet, texting, all that kind of stuff. If you're doing a lot of that, relying on that information to make your decision without sharing that with the person who's before the board, that can violate their due process. So you want to be careful about what you're using in your decisions. If you want additional research and stuff, just check and make sure that's information that everybody knows about before you make that decision. Some of the things that are not a subject to the open meeting law, social gatherings. Used to be your concern, can I go have lunch with board members, things like that. That's not governed by the open meeting law. At the same time, as appointed and elected officials, you need to be cautious of appearance. And so if they see 3 people of a 5-member board having lunch together, even if it's perfectly legit, there's going to be an appearance that something's going on that shouldn't be. So you just need to be cautious of that stuff. As long as you are not discussing matters before the board, there's not an issue with social gatherings. Trainings like this, it's fine for you to talk to your fellow board members, things like that. They're not subject to the open meeting law. And litigation sessions, which come up for some of the boards from time to time, mainly the county commission in Lyon County. Very few other boards have litigation sessions. School board, I think, has those frequently too, but it's mainly going to be elected boards that are dealing with that. So get into some of the logistics. I know the cabs have systems to try to get agendas posted, secretaries, other people that help. And it's a heavy lift sometimes to do what the open meeting law requires with volunteers and knowing all the rules and getting things posted, all that stuff. Erin does a great job helping out, but she also needs help from the cabs and other boards that are giving her the information. So posting the agenda, the principal location, usually is going to be where the county manager's office, county offices, unless it's some other board. On the internet is always where it's going to go, the state website, the county website, and 3 full days before the meeting. So you have to calculate that, not counting weekends. So you 3 business days. So if you have a Tuesday meeting, you'd have to post by 9 a.m. on the previous Thursday. So you have Thursday, Friday, and Monday. You don't count the day of the meeting on your 3 days notice. You also, we'll get into it a little bit more, but people have requested the agenda. Those time requirements also apply to when you give them the agenda. Don't forget holidays. Sometimes you have a regularly scheduled meeting, you have a Monday holiday, you forget to take that into account and don't post your agenda in time. The holiday does not count. Things that have to be on your agenda, obviously the date and time of the meeting, the location of the meeting, and then also the name of the person that posted and noticed the meeting. Very important now, if you are doing your meetings by remote technology, part of that agenda has to include all of that Zoom or whatever system you're using, all that information, so the public can access the meeting that way. The items on the agenda, clear and complete rule, which is that the agenda has to state what the board is going to do. You think that's pretty easy. Sometimes it's harder than you think. So you just want to pay attention to your agendas. If you have a chance to review your agendas ahead of time, think about it. Think about what it is you want the board to decide. Make sure that the agenda item covers that. Make sure it spells out what the board wants to do. Make sure that the board's authorized to take that action. Sometimes we want to do certain decisions and things that really aren't in the purview of our board. And so you want to be cautious about that. Make the agenda item match the language of the action the board's taking. And always make sure you can add more in the agenda and do less, but you can't have less in the agenda and do more. So sometimes if you are unsure exactly what the item might result in terms of a decision, you can list a couple options and you can do one or more of those, but you can't do it the other way. You can't list one option and then do option 2. These are just some examples that were pulled out of some old agendas. From a planning example from, I believe, a planning commission agenda. Just gives you an idea. The planning items are really detailed in the agenda, and that serves a benefit of putting everybody on notice of the location, what's going on, what the planning commission is going to decide. A contract item just shows who's going to be involved in that contract, the term, if there's a dollar amount. You want to include those sorts of specifics so that the public knows what's going on with those. And then so in the agenda items, when you have a nice detailed agenda item, comes time to approve or deny that, it's very easy to make the motion because you can just read right off the agenda. You know that's going to be your decision. I approve or deny a recommendation for ABC. Here's an example of a case the Attorney General got where the agenda stated District Board Policy 3.01, conduct meetings of the Board of Trustees, specific section 011, officers of the board. The board on that item approved a reorganization of the officers under this agenda item. Anybody think there's a problem with that? I mean, I read that agenda item and I can't figure out what they had in mind with that. Everybody see it? Kind of a formal agenda item and some details in there, but yeah. That's one problem with it for sure. But I think that we'll talk a little bit about what the answer is. Did everybody hear Scott? He said, could it be that it doesn't say for possible action? And we'll talk a little bit about that on the few further down in the program. But yes, the agenda item would have to take for possible action.
It doesn't say reorganization. It talks about the conduct, which has nothing to do with reorganization of board members. But it doesn't, it just says specific section 011, officers of the board, but it has nothing to do with reorganization of officers.
Right. Everybody hear that? The agenda item has nothing, says nothing about reorganization of the officers. And so the board approved that. That's likely to be a problem. Let's see what the Attorney General said not clear and complete. And so even though you have the sections of policies, all that kind of stuff, you can have great detail in the agenda. If the public can't tell what you're going to do, the agenda is not sufficient. And so the other thing to remember is a lot of times, and the county's got in trouble with this, there's tons of stuff in the backup. You have a little one-line agenda item and you have 50 pages of backup. Well, you can just look at the backup. No, the open meeting law does not allow that. You can't rely on the backup to get the detail of what the board's considering. Has to stay on the agenda. That item by itself has to stand alone. This is a county open meeting law violation, the Board of County Commissioners from a few years back, where they had an item pretty common across the state with boards when the legislature is about to go in session or in session, because things are pretty fluid and rapid. There's often an agenda item to discuss legislative issues. And this is what the county had on there. And says generically what's going to happen, but it doesn't tell you it's too broad for somebody to be able to say what's going to happen. And so the complaint, I think, dealt with, you can't tell from this item what the county's going to support or oppose, for instance. And so I don't remember if there was even action taken on this item that led to the complaint. But the Attorney General said that you can't do this. And you need to provide a specific list of legislation, or you're going to have to come back with what it is the board is considering. So the county's made some changes with that. I'm not aware of any other problems, but the County Board of Commissioners is careful about these kind of legislative decisions, making sure that the public's aware. Yeah.
What if during deliberation, change in some part of the potential item to be voted on changes? For instance, there's a contract extension for 4 years and the board deliberates and decides only 2 years is appropriate. Or there's a request to send $1 million and the board deliberates and decides, well, only $800,000 should be approved. Is that still consistent with the changes to what's being voted on?
Yeah. Everybody hear that question? Question is, you have an agenda item and it changes during the course of discussion. The two examples are, you have a contract renewal for 4 years on the agenda. The board discusses it. We only want 2 years. We have a budget item, $1 million for this item. We only want to allocate 800,000 or spend 800,000 on this project, whatever it is. Can you do that under the open meeting law? And the general rule is you can do less than is on the agenda. You would still have to have, you have to have the information on that contract, like the parties and the amount or whatever is detailed enough to know the public what you're doing. But if you decided that a 2-year extension was better than a 4-year, as long as you had information on there that you were considering an extension and you did less, that's going to be okay under the open meeting law. Same thing with the financial obligations. Generally, if it's less, it'll be okay. Scott?
It also has to be whether or not something could fit that meeting by reading that, because there's for something that we don't do, I'll use as an example. If union dues were $100 a month, we're going to discuss raising it to possibly $150. You can't go and vote to lower the union dues because that wasn't on. there. And then I might have showed up to it, someone said, we're lowering it because I think we couldn't offer it. So if it changes, whether or not I would, is a consideration.
Everybody hear that comment? You have to be able to tell, you can't change the substance of the item. Like, we're gonna increase this budget item. Doing less is not decreasing that budget item. Because if you're gonna decrease that budget item, people weren't on notice you were gonna do that. The agenda only said increase. And so there is a little, you can't just do, I guess, I don't know how to say it, but you can't just do less. It has to still meet that agenda, right? We're gonna extend the contract. As long as you're extending the contract, that's fine. You can't cancel the contract. Even though technically, I guess that's less, because you're not on the agenda to do that. So it has to still match the agenda. Make sense? Okay. Not sure why this slide, I think there's a couple slides like this that do this. Again, this is what the agenda has to include. The action items under the law have to include the language for possible action. So on most of your agendas, you'll see everything you're taking action on at the start is the words for possible action. People think, well, of course it's going to be for possible action. It wouldn't be on the agenda otherwise. We have to put that in there. So we encourage you to make sure it's in there. You want to have on your agenda, and most do now, that items may be taken out of order. And or you can consider them in any order. Items may be combined or removed at any time. And any public comment restrictions you have should appear on the agenda. 3 minutes for public participation, 5 minutes for public participation. That's what you're going to do. You should probably have that written on your agenda. Some of the problem areas we see, workshops, reports, presentations. So a lot of times the agenda will say for presentation only. So hypothetically, somebody comes to the library board, they're going to show you this great new program for library research or whatever. They do this nice presentation, everything's good to go. And the board says that is really a great product, would help all of our customers and everything else. So we want to go ahead and go forward that. Okay, let's make a motion for the library director to do a little more research and bring back a formal proposal. Any problem with a workshop like that? If your agenda doesn't say for possible action, you just violated the open meeting law. And so a lot of times we do workshops thinking this is going to be a productive workshop. The board gets to the end of the workshop and the county manager or whatever has to stand up and say no action. And so it frustrates board members, especially if they're meeting monthly, because you have to wait a month and come back. If you think you're going to take possible action, there's nothing that prevents you on a workshop from including language for possible action and what that might be. And oftentimes it's to direct staff to research it or to, bring back a proposal, whatever it might be. But sometimes it is beneficial on workshops to do that. Reports, I need to be cautious about, yeah.
You started using that term workshops, but I'm not exactly familiar with what's meant by a workshop in the context of open meetings.
Yeah, workshop generally is sort of an interactive discussion on an item to kind of flesh out the details, that sort of thing. Was how I would define a workshop. Agree with that?
They're not quite as formal as like a regular board meeting, right? There's usually some back and forth.
Yeah.
A lot more back and forth between board members and staff, or board members and board members and the public.
So it's not like a regularly scheduled meeting. It's a separate instance where the board meets together for a workshop.
It could be.
Could be either way. It could be a separate meeting where it's just a workshop, or it could be on an agenda where there's a workshop to discuss some specific item. And it's more a discussion to kind of generate ideas and do those sorts of things with a particular item. So it's a little bit different than a report or a presentation. I would view a report as somebody is coming in to tell you what's going on, and that's the end of it pretty much. A presentation is somebody comes in to present some certain item to the board.
Could I give an example?
Yeah.
This is Erin Lopez. I just wanted to give you a, for instance, an either or. So like today we're doing a training, so we're not going to be doing any deliberations or making any decisions. So if we're coming together for a workshop, your board's coming together, like say recently the Board of County Commissioners did the waste franchise. There was a lot of discussion, deliberation going on that day, going through a contract that's very detailed and has a lot of information. And there may be some action that they need to take to give to the county manager, the community development director, to get some of these discussions done. So normally you don't have a workshop that's on a regular scheduled agenda because it's so much detail. So really the difference is a training is something that you're going to go to have a meeting, which isn't part of open meeting law. And then a workshop is you're coming together to come and make a decision about something. So that's why it would then partake to the meeting law. So I hope that helps, gives you a little bit more.
It seems like decision would be a key word there.
Yes,
That would mean that it would be subject.
yes, because you're making a decision and your board is required to do that. So training decisions have been made. We're giving you information. Workshops, you're coming together to come into a deliberation for a decision.
Yeah, and to provide a little clarification, it doesn't necessarily mean, so just because you're not making a decision on something doesn't necessarily mean that a workshop wouldn't be a part of, covered under open meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions on that? Yeah, reports, generally no action on reports. Future agenda items can be a sticky thing. Remember, it's not agendized what those items will be. So boards need to be very cautious about making motions and stuff on future agenda items unless they're listed on the agenda. Usually what happens on those, there's a discussion, no action. And then the chair, for instance, would say, I'm going to put that on the agenda, or whatever your bylaws say, whoever establishes that agenda. Stick to the agenda. Goes without saying, but that's a real challenge sometimes with boards because people want to talk about a lot of things that don't fall under that agenda item. And so trying to keep people on track is important when you're not deciding things that aren't on the agenda. Just sort of basic rule, make sure that all your comments go through the chair. Just seems to be a better format for handling the meeting. A lot of back and forth gets confusing. If you kind of have a formal channel for that, seems to work better. Administrative action. This is something that's come up a couple times over the last few years with the cabs. And it does come up from time to time at the county commission, other things where the board is going to take specific action against a person. Some of the areas where we see this is code enforcement, businesses, people that have licenses, and there's a complaint about what somebody is or is not doing in their area. So the Citizen Advisory Board says, we want to put that on the agenda. And if you're going to take action against a specific person, there's specific notice requirements. Personal service 5 days before the meeting or 21 days certified mail. It's a little confusing what the administrative action is. And there's been some discussion amongst the staff, Aaron and Andrew and me about that. And also among the board and some of the different boards in the county. And so we're trying to clarify that and figure out what that means particularly for the cabs, but also the other boards. And so the administrative action means actions involving an individual's character or qualifications, not those of real property. That's a little bit confusing. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but we can talk about some different scenarios. What administrative action does not include is adoption of ordinances, action on zoning requests, building permits, most variances, and land use decisions. So that's why you can hold items without that personal notice. There's a number of reasons, but like on planning recommendations, the CABs, the planning commission, all that stuff goes without specific notice. Because they're generally against the entire population, neighborhoods, that sort of thing. What are actions against a person? Imposing discipline on a person is an action against that person. Most penalties are personal and would be actions against that person. And so examples would be code enforcement. Yeah, question?
We tell them what CAB is.
Citizen Advisory Board. Sorry about that.
No, no.
Everybody here, CAB, question was, what is a CAB? Citizen Advisory Board. And so code enforcement involves a penalty. That if you are talking about somebody's property and you're going to say, we are going to talk about that property and take action regarding it, you are actually going to do something against that person, whether it be file a complaint with the county, whether it be refer it to the sheriff's office, whatever else, you are taking action against that person, not necessarily the property. And so we're concerned that if you're going to do that as a board, you need to provide that person notice. They have the right to be there to say, I disagree or whatever it is, or participate in that discussion before a decision like that is made. And so same with a business, we don't like that business down the street. We're going to put it on the agenda and discuss all the things they're doing wrong. If one, the CABs probably shouldn't be doing that. There's other agencies in the county that are responsible for those sorts of things. Generally boards, the county commission's not going to do that kind of thing. Usually it's handled in other channels. But if it is going to be on your agenda, just make sure that that person or business or whatever is notified. Any questions on that administrative action? We are working through it. As I said, we've had a few issues come up where the citizen advisory boards have wanted to discuss important issues in their community, but they trigger some of these requirements, and we're working around how best to handle that. So just be cautious of that. Any other questions on that? Public participation, a very important part of the open meeting law. The way it's set up and the way every board should be doing it now is 2 public comment periods. One at the beginning of the meeting, one at the end of the meeting. And generally in Lyon County, we also encourage you to allow public participation on each item. And there's practical reasons for that. We just think, I feel that's a better way to do it. It's very difficult. People want to talk about the item when you're on the item. They don't want to talk at the beginning and then an hour later you bring up the item and talk about it. Yeah.
When you brought that up, it was an issue with the school board last year where they voted to stop public comment before their agenda items. They only allowed public comment at the beginning of the meeting and at the end of the meeting. So what you're stating is that is a recommendation, that's not a rule.
That is not a rule. You can,
When they voted to remove that, they were within their right to do that.
I think that's probably right. Yeah. I think it
That
is.
was not a violation.
Yeah, it is an or in the law. You have to do either or. And so most boards though they do both. I think if you look at agendas and meetings,
They violated the norm by voting, by voting to remove the public comment before each agenda. They violated the norm, but they didn't violate the open meeting law rules. Is that
yeah,
correct?
I would say that's probably correct. Yeah. Yeah, most meetings that I've observed in Nevada are conducted in a way that they allow participation beginning and during the items. Anybody have a different understanding? I know you guys have probably watched lots of meetings and seen lots of meetings, but that's generally how it's done, I think. Yeah. Sir Mark.
It seems like to me this rule of the law for openness in public and confidence that you're running your meeting correctly and having everything out there, right?
Yeah,
So when the board says, okay, you get 10 minutes, we got 30 agenda items, you got 10 minutes to speak to them, all 30, no more than 3 minutes on each agenda item. There's no way that you can actually speak on all the agenda items in that time frame. So to me, that seems like it'd be a violation of local media law because you're not getting the opportunity to address each of those items.
yeah, could be in the right circumstance, may be an issue for sure. We'll talk a little bit more about public participation and what the chair can do in that context. Like did everybody hear Sir Mark, you know, if you're just allowed to make comment at the beginning and there's 5 items you want to comment on, and there's a 3-minute limitation on your public participation, are you going to be able to meaningfully comment on those 5 items? Probably not. But under the format we recommend, that doesn't happen. You have a chance to speak on each item. So, yeah.
Guess my other question would be public participation. I mean, some individuals like to have it a pretty, open time to communicate certain things to the community. And then other groups like to kind of, hold public participation to specific agenda items. Is there an open meeting law requirement that says what can be talked about or what can be restricted speech at public participation?
Yeah. Everybody hear that question? The question is, so people want to do different things at public participation. Some people want to get up and speak what's on their mind, talk about in general things. Others like to talk about specific items. And I'm paraphrasing, but does the open meeting law govern how that's done? And I'll talk a little more later in the presentation. We go into that in a little more detail. But the answer is the open meeting law does cover that. The short, quick answer is people can say whatever they want in public participation with certain limitations. But it's a free speech thing they can say as long as they're not doing something that's offensive or inappropriate or anything like that. They can say pretty much what they want during public participation. You can limit discussions on agenda items to the agenda item. So I don't know if that answers your question.
So, so what you're saying is if you have an open meeting where you have the public participation after each agenda item, you can limit speech to those specific agenda items. But if it's public participation at the beginning or the end, you can talk about anything you want. You do not have to reference a specific agenda item, correct?
That is correct. And I would caution you on agenda items too, to allow some latitude to public participation.
For
But
the most part.
for the most part, yeah. But generally that is correct.
So limiting the beginning or end to specific agenda items would be a violation of open meeting law because it would not allow full public participation.
No, not necessary. Well, yeah, I don't think you can limit public participation to just what is on the agenda.
Okay.
If that's my good.
You can limit it to what's with their jurisdiction.
No, you can't.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
yeah, public participation is just that, the public gets to say what they want generally. Okay, and we also, this is another thing, the county commission's really good at this. And it's super hard for board members because sometimes somebody gets up and just spews out a bunch of stuff critical of what the board's doing. They're totally off base. They're talking about something that's not under your purview and you want to respond, right? As a board member, you're sitting up there thinking, I need to respond to this and set the record straight. We encourage you not to respond in public participation because you get it's generally not going to be productive. 2, you can run afoul of the open meeting law because suddenly you're having a discussion on an item that's not on the agenda. And so the county commission seems to be, because they confront that frequently, they're pretty good at they listen to public participation and go on to the next agenda item. I know it's tough to do, but that's the recommended course of action. Yeah.
If the public participation is asking a question about an agenda item and they want clarification about something, shouldn't the board answer their question though?
Yeah, everybody hear that question? Public participation, somebody gets, I have a question about agenda item 5 and gives you that question. Then there is a decision, do you answer that question? And most of the time, I think you can answer that question. It's just a basic factual logistic question. It has nothing to do with the decision or whatever. The other thing we see too, and again, this is further down, we discuss it, but sometimes somebody gets up and starts their public participation and it's on a specific agenda item. They may not understand how the meeting generally works. They don't come to meetings, whatever. It's okay for the chair to say, we will be discussing that item we would request that you retain your comments until we get to that item. And generally, people want to do that because they want to be part of the discussion of that item.
Well, Mr. Miller, that's first.
Okay, Scott.
Just, it has to, on your agenda items, doesn't it have to be germane as far as the discussion to the agenda item? I mean, the board can't respond back to.
Yeah, the board can't respond back. I'm cautious about telling somebody in the public to stop their comments. But the board needs to be cognizant. If they're talking about stuff that is not related to the agenda item, don't talk about that stuff. Stick to the agenda as a board member. The public, remember, is not subject to the open meeting law. The board is. And so that's a difference. You just have to remember that. And so, whenever you shut somebody down in public comment, you just run the risk of a complaint that's not going to benefit anybody. So better practice is to let them just say their piece. You can tell them, hey, that's not on this agenda item, respectfully or whatever, and usually they'll move on. Yeah.
So an incident I had during a split board meeting, I didn't finish my reading of what I was going on for the public, for the agenda. And I got to a point where they kept telling me my time was up. Another person in the congregation, I'll say, in the public, she came up to finish it. Even though she had already spoken, but she had not used her 10 minutes, as the school board said we did at the beginning. They stopped her and would not allow her to continue on. Was that a violation? She did not really get her 10 minutes. She didn't take her full 10 minutes, but she came up to finish what I was trying to say because they would not let me finish my last paragraph.
Yeah, I mean, I think on those time limitations like that, yeah, I would think the person would get their full 10 minutes. You want to, as the board members, you want to certainly have an orderly, running of your meeting. And so you can't get into a problem if every time you have a bunch of people that are going to use their full 3 minutes and then a bunch of people that only use a minute. You don't want to necessarily have those people that only use the minute get up and use their next 2 minutes. I mean, is it a violation? Could be, I guess, but it gets a little tricky for the board to manage that kind of stuff, I think. Yeah.
So the fire board meeting the other night, they say on their agenda that nobody that has public minutes can donate any of their minutes to anybody else to their thoughts or whatever.
Yeah.
It says that, like,
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a wise thing. Again, you want to be careful about that. Obviously, people can say what they want. If I'm up speaking and what's that?
I didn't quite.
Okay, so if you didn't hear that, the example was talking about you have a time limitation on the meeting, 5 minutes for public participation. And you have an important thing you're talking about, and it's going to turn out to be 10 minutes or whatever. And so if I'm sitting in the audience and I don't have anything to say, can I jump up and finish that presentation for that person using my 5 minutes? Generally, I think that's okay. You get into an issue though, if you've already spoken and you have a minute left, can they let you get back up and do that? I'm not sure that's clear. The question, then somebody said at the fire district on the agenda, it says, you cannot use your time to finish what somebody else wants to say. I think if that's what you want to do, that is a good practice because it's a limitation on public participation. And as we mentioned earlier, if you want to do that, you have to include that limit on the agenda. Yeah.
I guess clarification though, you said you cannot donate minutes to another person, not.
Right,
designate somebody else. to take it.
Yeah.
What it says.
Yeah.
Okay, but you could take your minutes to finish somebody else's presentation.
I don't
Like,
believe so.
it's like.
I mean,
No,
Hand me the
that's a
paper.
different thing. Yeah, your time cannot be donated like by proxy or by the calendar. So you can't get up by proxy and say, because you know how like in Congress, they'll be like, I want to yield my 2 minutes over to Senator so.
Yeah, but then Senator so-and-so keeps talking, that they're saying is not.
Written into there, they can be able-
Yeah.
All right, so we're getting a lot back and forth discussion. And it's a good discussion. I mean, I don't know that we're all going to agree on that answer. I think it is accepted that you cannot donate your time to somebody else. That is the rule. I mean, there's no question about that, I don't think. The question is, though, if somebody is up there speaking and has a written thing they're reading and then hands that to somebody else to go up and use their minutes reading that same thing, that's not necessarily donating your time. I don't encourage that, but that is different than saying Andrew Haskin is going to speak for Steve Ryan, use my 5 minutes. And he's already spoken for 5 minutes. That you cannot do. That's undisputed if you have that limitation on your agenda. Make sense? Okay.
Why would you recommend, you said you don't recommend to allow someone to have a written statement and hand it off to the next person and vice versa?
Because it circumvents what the board has set up as the rules, right? As a board, you want to run a meeting in an orderly fashion. You have a lot of business to get done. You want to make sure everybody gets participation. And I view that as circumventing the rules that the board has agreed on. It may not be, I mean, there's different scenarios. I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. And it's a lot of hypotheticals, but you want to be cautious as a board that you don't want to allow the public to circumvent your rules. If they're constantly trying to do that, you revisit your rules. Maybe we need to give 5 minutes. Maybe we need to give 10 minutes. If there's issues that come up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through here. Just any other, yeah.
I was gonna say that, when we were trying to find, have Walmart and Reno, what we did was we specifically said, one person's gonna take this part of the argument, one person's gonna take this part, so we broke it up into small chunks, if they could handle that in front of the board within the time limits that they have. So if
Yeah.
you're looking at trying to say something to the board, you wanna have it within the time constraints you have, break it up, do that ahead of
Yeah. Right. Everybody hear that comment? The public can meet. I mean, this isn't about how the public does it, but yeah, you can meet, decide, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this and break that up so that 3 minutes or whatever gets through all those issues because one person probably can't do it. The other thing we see on these boards, sometimes you have a contested, usually on a planning issue, other issues too, though, but you have a contested planning issue and they don't want whatever, like a Walmart, they don't want a subdivision, whatever it is. A lot of people are there to speak, right? And so you're going to have a lengthy meeting. You have other business to conduct and you want to get through that stuff. It is fair for you to ask that if somebody has already made the same comment, ask them just to come up and say, you know, we agree or we have the same concerns or whatever. And generally people are okay with that. Most people don't want to just hear themselves speak. Some do, but most people will say, yeah, I just agree with what the previous speaker said or what everybody said. And it just streamlines your meeting so that you don't have to come in and hear the same thing over and over and over again. Yeah.
Well, I think the issue here is we have two different types of meeting laws going on. One with the school board, one with the other boards. If you run out of time in public comment in our boards, you can speak again on that agenda item later on.
Yeah.
Or in the school board meeting.
Yeah, there's different ways it's done. I understand that. So it can be a challenge for that, for sure. We'll talk a little bit more about some of that. Just I'll run through the rest of this quickly. Request for copies of the agenda. You can request it. It can be sent electronically. It has to be the final agenda. You can't amend the agenda after it's posted. Heartache with the county system that I have is it says amended agenda or something like that when things get added to the backup or whatever. They're not changing the agenda itself. They're adding backup, which is legit. You can do that. Remember that if somebody requests a notice, it's a continuing request for 6 months. And it also has to be provided in the same deadline as the posting of the notice. So if you request a notice to the county commission meeting, Erin, and it's by email or regular mail, she has to mail that out or email it out by 9 a.m. 3 days before. Supporting materials, that's not a continuing request. I want to receive the agenda packet. If the board wants to, they can say you have to request that every time. We don't anymore because it's usually posted online. 99% of people are just going online looking at it. But if you're mailing that out and it's a real hassle, it's not a continuing request. They have to do it each time. Let's see, the one thing, The one thing on the agenda packet too, remember that if you have information you want to add as backup, you can't just send it to the board. If somebody's requested the copy of those materials, you need to make sure it's posted and it's sent to those people too when it's added, right? A lot of times things come in late. I'm going to share that with the board members. You really need to be sharing that with the public. Let's see, minutes. Keeping the minutes, have the agenda item on there, subject matter, the motion, second, and the vote, how the different board members voted. And if requested by one of the members, the vote of each member. Public comment, if the person requests that it be included, and any other board material that a board member requests. We want the minutes to reflect what happened, but we don't necessarily need a verbatim of the minutes, right? We just want to be able to tell, look back in the minutes and see this is what happened, this is how it was voted. Minutes must be available within 30 days. That comes up especially with some of the boards that don't meet frequently. That it's not, they're not ready, they're not approved within 30 days. Usually we'll make a draft available, just let them know that it's not an approved version. Because the board may not meet every 30 days, may meet quarterly, or just a monthly meeting doesn't always fall within 30 days. Copies of the audio have to be provided if requested. So your meetings have to be recorded, pretty standard on that. This talks a little bit more about the public comment issues and what we were discussing earlier. So you can restrict the speakers to what is under your purview. Pretty tough to do if somebody's just getting up, going on a rant, whatever. So again, just be careful about that. And you don't want to be accused of stopping public comment because you disagree with the viewpoint. Some additional public comment issues. Does the open meeting law require meaningful public comment? No. Again, people can say things that you think are not relevant, that are you disagree with, that are inaccurate. And that's fine. That's acceptable public participation. As we talked about limits, if you want to limit time, you can go ahead and do that on the agenda. Pretty common that there's a 3 or 5 minute public participation limit. And the reason we include that usually is because if you do have a big item, fills the room, you don't want your meeting going all night before you even get to the agenda. And so it's good to have it on there. And this last bullet point here lets you know that the chairman can, and they often do, allow additional time. Somebody has 3 minutes and they have 5 minutes they want to speak and there's not a huge agenda. It's fine to let them speak if it's something that's within the board's purview and helpful for the board or whatever. Remember, we want to give the public a chance to voice their concerns. Deliberation and action. We've talked a lot about that. I don't think there's any questions, but on action, it's a commitment to vote or an actual vote. So just remember that. If you're saying, I'm going to vote for that next meeting, that's deemed action. Again, how to avoid a violation. Are you taking action? If you knew that that action was in violation of the open meeting law, it's going to be a violation. Strict compliance is required. A lot of times we get calls. We're just an advisory board. We're just the library board. We're informal. We don't know all the rules. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. You're still held to the same standard. And this is going back many years. I know Aaron and I were pulling our hair out with a board in Lyon County where we literally got complaints every meeting, tons of complaints. And the response always was, we're just a volunteer board. We don't know all the rules. So just remember that the Attorney General doesn't care if you're volunteer, if you're paid or anything else, you're subject to the rules and you just need to be careful about following those rules. Let's see, just go through this quickly. One thing to remember, if you do violate, you're having a meeting and you end up that there was a violation of the open meeting law, you are allowed under the law to correct that violation before a complaint's filed. You can do that during the meeting, or you can do it at a subsequent meeting. And so it's important to remember, you do something that you think is inappropriate, you bring it up at the meeting and correct it. One quick example to sort of put it in context, and this happened in Douglas County, planning item, discussing a contentious agenda item. After a break, one of the members admitted to a violation and described the conversation that was had on the break with other board members. And they came back into the meeting and said, hey, we violated the open meeting law. We had this discussion. This is what we talked about. And that was the nature of the discussion. They hadn't taken action prior to that time. And when they did take action, it was determined that was not a violation of the open meeting law, that they had corrected it. Even though they violated it by convening outside of the meeting, discussing the item as a quorum, it was determined that they didn't violate the meeting because they cured it during the course of the meeting. The one thing, if you are going to correct something, it's not just reaffirming the vote or whatever you did that was wrong. You have to actually discuss what the violation was, reconsider it, and then make another vote based on that further information. Some of the remedies if violations occurs, the action's void. That's the big thing. Anything you did in violation of the open meeting law has no effect. It can be a crime. There can be monetary fees, other issues. Fined up to $500. This is a case from a few years ago, big in the news. The Washoe County School District terminated superintendent, took action, no agenda, no notice, and each trustee in that case was fined $500. If you do get a violation, you'll get a notice from the Attorney General's office. If you get a notice that you violated the open meeting law, we ask that you forward it to Aaron right away or to our office, and we will generally respond on those complaints. We'll work with the board and either dispute the complaint or admit responsibility for the complaint on behalf of the board and try to mitigate anything that's coming from that violation. If there is a violation, you have to include it on your next agenda once the violation's issued and state what the nature of the violation is. Some additional resources, the Attorney General manual available on the website, very helpful, has a lot of good information, examples for agendas, other items, questions, so that's helpful. And that's the end. Yeah, Scott.
Like if an agenda item, the agenda itself was not done right. Would everything on that agenda be void? Or should we broke all of them? So like I say, I didn't notice my agenda. Now, everything that we did on that agenda item would be void.
Yes, did everybody hear the question? If you didn't do the agenda right, you had the wrong date and time. You go into the meeting, you hold the meeting, take action on 5 items. Are those items all void? I think the short answer is yes. But if the notice is not right, the rest of the meeting has an issue. That's why we always say if there's an issue with the notice, cancel the meeting.
And does that pertain to, you have something with void in that one and it can lead to a different one? Would those actions also be void in a different?
What was that?
So like if I took an action, I'll use the school board. They sanctioned a member at how much time they could speak. And then every member after that, they continue to do so until they found out there was a violation. All those ones in the other ones, the meetings, they never had a chance to use their full amount of time. So would those also? Because as a commissioner, I could say, I could have had my 10 minutes more during that time. That could have changed that vote.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to that scenario. How they would treat that, whether there's a succession of meetings and then finally at one end meeting, there's action taken. What that means for the rest. I mean, that's getting pretty complicated. I don't know how that would be answered.
Just how you have some school.
Yeah, and I don't, yeah, it's hard just in sort of a hypothetical like that to say this is what the result would be. That's a pretty complicated kind of issue where there's a series of meetings, a number of things that may have happened. Yeah, Tom.
And the findings of fact from the Attorney General on an open meeting law violation, if it doesn't state that all the items in that agenda where they violated open meeting law are void, does that mean they don't have to void those, even though in 10.02, the open meeting law manual states that they do?
Yeah, the question is, if you have a findings of fact and, order from the Attorney General, which is what they often do on an open meeting law complaint. If it doesn't state everything in that agenda was void, or is it void? I don't think it's void. If they're telling you that everything is not, then I think you're okay. There may be reasons the Attorney General does that, because there may be whatever timing issues. There could be a lot of issues, that surround that sort of thing. So the complaint may not void everything. But generally speaking, the complaints are more directed towards individual items. Yeah, Tom.
So that would mean that the findings of fact from the Attorney General would have more weight than the open meeting law manual?
The question is, does the opinion of the Attorney General have more weight than the law? Not necessarily, although the Attorney General is in charge with enforcing the law. And so how they're going to enforce it, they have some discretion. And so, that's really a question that the Attorney General would have to answer. And I don't know who right now is handling the open meeting law stuff for the Attorney General. Yes, sir, Mark.
So this thing came up because they held the meeting in a different location and posted. So that meeting should have never happened. Because the public didn't have the opportunity to participate in that meeting.
That'd be my position, that if the agenda has the wrong location, that the meeting cannot be held.
Couldn't have been held. So they made it happen in that meeting. Should have been null and void because it's already a no meeting kind of a thing.
I mean, that's getting kind of beyond the training. So
No, no,
I can't, yeah, I can,
Open meeting law. Should that violation be read at our meetings if we get violated?
yeah, the
Should
violation.
the whole violation letter be read?
No, what we've done at the county commission and some of the other boards I've seen is we've just attached it to the agenda. So you attach the violation from the Attorney General, and then you open it up for public comment, and then the board usually makes a motion to acknowledge the violation. But we have not required the board. Scott, I don't remember. I don't think we've required the board to read it verbatim. It's already in the record. And so you don't have to do that.
Sometimes we have to because someone asked about what was in the.
Yeah. So, yeah, but as a general rule, you don't have to read it verbatim. Yeah. All right. Any questions online? I wasn't very good about looking online for questions.
If you could put your hands up, on your corner in that way, or turn on your screen and put your hand up, either or would work, and so we can unmute you and if you have any questions.
Steve, I've got a question. So say you've noticed your meeting and you've noticed it so that you can have a Zoom link on there as well. So you've got the school location and a Zoom link. But you get to the meeting and for whatever reason, the technology won't work. Zoom doesn't work, the TV doesn't work, they can't hear you. Can you still have a meeting?
Yeah. So everybody hear the question, you agendize your meeting, everything's in order. There's a mistake on the Zoom link, right? The Zoom link has 78 letters and it's whatever. Or there's some technology issue. People cannot access the Zoom. Can you still have your meeting? No. If you're offering a meeting by remote technology, that has to work. There is an exception that if there's technology issues, you can still hold the meeting. So I believe what that means is if the internet is down in Silver Springs and the advisory board is meeting, If the Zoom link information is all accurate, if everything else is good, it has nothing to do with the board, with the agenda, with anything else. It has to do with Spectrum and whoever. Then you can still hold the meeting. That's pretty rare though nowadays. Usually the technology is fairly good. But other than that, if it's a board error, the meeting has to be canceled. Yeah.
I have two questions. A follow-up to that one. If the meeting's taking place in a public place, are they required to have a Zoom also, or is that optional?
That's optional with certain exceptions, but I believe it's optional for, like the local boards in Lyon County. I believe it's optional. I do, with elected boards, I think you probably do have to have the remote, perhaps. I don't think you do. You can have a physical location.
Thank you. And the second question about quorum. If three of us library trustees wanted to carpool down to Smith Valley for a meeting, would us being in a car together be a problem?
No,
It's not a quorum, right?
no, that's, it's not there's 7
Five.
plus 5. Yeah, so if 3 of you in a car, it is a quorum, right? But again, remember, it's fine to carpool, do that kind of stuff. I caution you on the appearance, right? You get to the meeting and somebody in the public who's super mad at the library decision sees 3 of you get out of the car and immediately they're thinking they already decided it. And so you have to be cautious of appearance when you're a board member, but there is no violation, just that 3 of you are together. You can carpool, just don't discuss agenda items. Yeah.
So I guess just to make sure everyone's on the same page, if you have hey, I'm not making it to the meeting today, everybody, sorry, I'll be there next time. That's totally fine.
Totally fine.
Discussion of the.
Yeah. Yeah, Tom.
In regards to AB 253, if the public's allowed to view a meeting via YouTube, are they also required to be able to comment at that meeting as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. Everybody here, if you're allowed to watch a meeting on YouTube, are they allowed to comment? I think the answer to that is no right now. Whether the legislature is gonna change that or not, I don't know. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, the statute doesn't say that you can't view it. 2, in a lot of the bigger areas, they have television and closed circuit and stuff like that. That's not interactive. You're allowed to watch the meeting, but it doesn't mean you can talk through your TV or whatever. So the fact that you can view a meeting does not mean you have to be able to, that's not the same as having a remote meeting. Does that make sense to everybody?
But you can't notice it like it's a.
Yeah, you can't notice it as a remote meeting. You can't notice it as, you can appear remotely and only allow it to be viewed.
It would be posted on your agenda.
Yeah, you can post on your agenda that you can watch our meetings on channel 2 or whatever, if that's what happens. But that's not the same as saying we're having a remote technology meeting. If you want to participate in that circumstance, you still have to be in the meeting. Yeah, there's not a limitation on publishing meetings. That makes sense, to allow people to watch them. But that is not the same as allowing them to participate. Yeah,
Did you file an open meeting law if, let's say, board of trustees meeting and they cut one person off, say, hey, your 10 minutes is up. You hear their little alarm go off, but then 2 or 3 other people, they allow them to go beyond that 10 minutes. And they allow them to talk for 12 to 15 minutes.
yeah.
Is that considered a violation?
Question is, public participation. Board cuts off 1 person at the time limit, 10 minutes. 3 people later, they let them go 12 minutes. 2 people later, they let them go 15. Is that a violation of the open meeting law? The board chair is allowed some discretion as to you can allow additional time. And we usually recommend that you do that. If somebody's mid-sentence, it seems not very courteous to say, stop right there. Let them finish their sentence or whatever. Usually you don't let them go on another minute or 2, but you do allow them to finish their thought that they're on. But anyways, is that a violation? It might be. My guess is though, unless it's limited by content, that they would not find that to be an open meeting law violation. They would find that within the discretion of the chair, as long as it was not like double the time, whatever. The issue you run into though is, they only allow additional time that are in people who are in favor of the item. They cut off the people that aren't or whatever.
Yeah.
You just need to be careful about that. But I don't think they would find a violation if you let somebody talk for 2 more minutes than somebody else. Any other questions online or? All right, yeah, sorry, it took a little longer than expected. Take a 5-minute break and then Aaron gets Scott.
You mentioned earlier that you could define that's on the agenda.
Yeah.
Would you like to see that voted on separate?
Yeah, question is combined, can you combine items on the agenda? And I guess you can if it says so on the agenda. Be careful about that. We recommend you try not to do that because then you get into an issue of what's being discussed. And the other risk is you have to vote on each item separately. And when you come to vote, if one's approved and one denied, it's difficult for us to decide what the approval was based on, what the denial was based on, if it's all discussed together. And so it's cleaner, in our opinion, if you discuss them separately, vote separately, but you are allowed to combine them for discussion. Is the rule.
So our consent agenda is not legal?
Consent agendas are legal, yeah, and used commonly. Consent agendas are routine items acted on without discussion generally. You still have public participation, but there's a group of items, 10 items. Generally consent agenda items, unless they're pooled, are not discussed individually. So it's a little bit different than what Scott's talking about.
Okay, so
All right.
we'll pause for a few minutes. If everyone wants to take a quick 5-minute break, we'll be back. 10:45 to start.
You'll see,
All right, everyone, I am Erin Lopez on the advisory board liaison. I really do appreciate the commissioners that, come in. If you guys want to stand up and introduce yourself in case anyone hasn't met you guys personally. Scott Keller and Tammy Hendricks. Tammy Hendricks,
Keller, Commissioner District 2, and former fire report.
for very many years, yeah, Scott and Tammy have worked together very, very many years. Almost a decade. So, I just really appreciate everyone coming in today. I know no one wants to come to a meeting on Saturday, but, necessary, call. So what I'm going to go over what the district attorney went over, but in more layman terms, and that you understand how to take all the rules that he has given you and then push forward with your meetings a little bit more at an administrative secretarial type direction for you. There we go. All right. So some of the things that we will be covering today: open public meetings, agenda requirements, notice of meeting, cancellation of meeting, meeting minutes, letter transmittal, roles and responsibilities. We'll go over compliance, communication, board officers, and role, your role as a CAT member. So in open public meetings, as Steve was talking about, if you are having a meeting, it's open to the public. And so that we, even as advisory board members, we need to be cognizant of that and make sure that we're following these rules. So as you are appointed into your position, we send out the advisory board handbook and also along with the open meeting law manual. It's important to, I know that I get a lot of emails and asking questions, and we're always here to help you. But we also send out these guides to help answer these questions. For me as a learner, if I read it, use it, apply it, it helps me to then understand where do I go to get like these answers. It helps me to learn more if I read it, hear it, and then move forward with it. So that's why we also want to give you this information. Also, in the case that if one of it isn't available, those were the answers. So, and as I was just saying, we are always here as supportive for you. I'm sorry.
Can you move to the other side or? You see the screen?
Sure. Yep.
All right, now I need to. Now.
Now I'm gonna ask you to move over on this side. Also, I have a very different tone or for a female tone. So if any of you guys can't hear me, please just let me know and I'll try to repeat myself. As I was saying, so the county manager's office, mainly I am tasked with the position as liaison to help you either give you direction or help you find the person that needs to give you direction to. So if you have a road question, I'm not going to answer it. I have nothing about roads except for how to drive down them. So if that's the case, then I'm going to forward you to the person who you need to talk to. Responsibility of all CAB members is not only that you have to be compliant with the open meeting law, but you have to be compliant with the handbook and anything that if the Board of County Commissioners gives us directions to give you, facilitating your board business with. If I say like, this is what I need you to do, it's because either I'm directed by, the county manager or the Board of County Commissioners to do that. So one of the things that we want to highlight today is that the agenda is the public's notice. So while we do use that for open meeting law purposes, that everything on here is what we're following, it's also, we have to be very cognizant of everything we write on here is for the public. We also have to understand that the other counterpart to that is to facilitate your meetings. So that's why when Steve was giving us direction, whenever you write out your agenda items, we have to make sure that's clear and concise, that people understand it. And also the part about when you write an agenda item, our process is if you were to read this in the record, you could also read it as a motion. So the agenda is the public's notice and it's to help your board facilitate its meeting. So you want to have a meeting. So here, let's get started. So if you want to pull out, I gave you a handout of an example of an agenda. If you just kind of want to look at it, it will go over some of the points. I highlighted some of the things in red, some are not in red. But if you look at the top of it, it should have the time, place, and location of the meeting. I did not put any Zoom information because the majority of the advisory boards and some other boards are not meeting Zoom. But if you are meeting Zoom, we recommend that you put this at the top. We also have to have on there where the meeting has been posted. I know past practice, some members would say this meeting has been posted here and here and here, and then, you know, basically digitally sign their name on the agenda. That's an old practice. You just need to have on the agenda where it has been posted. So if you don't have an electronic or a website, sorry, and you're not doing it to the website, the state website, and then also the place of the governing body, then we have to go back and look at where are the 3 public requirements and have those written on there and the state website. So if you have questions about that later, we can look at your agenda and feel free to reach out to me. We can kind of go over that and review that part of it. On your agenda items, we need to have clear and complete statements. So once again, if you were to read that in the record, would the public understand it? And can you do anything with it? Or is it going to reflect a report or a presentation? So we also want to have that information if things can be taken in and out of order, combined in consideration. If you do not have this written on your agenda, you cannot do this. So if you just have like blanket items, you have to follow that direct order. So if you want to take something out of order, this notice has to be on here. 2 public comment periods at the beginning and end. And then denote for possible action for discussion or presentation only. Every once in a while, I'll harass you guys if I read your item and I really don't know if you're going to take a deliberating action or just a report. I may reach out to you and say, hey, if you're going to take action on this, it says for possible action and it says update on park. Okay, what park? What's the update? What's the action? I need more information. If I read it and I really don't know what you're doing with it, I'm going to reach back out to you. It's a courtesy. It's a kindness. I don't like harassing people, but they pay me hourly to harass you. So topics not properly noticed at the agenda cannot be discussed at the meeting. If something does come up, you can always get to the part of your meeting and say, I would like this agendized for another meeting. But just if you ever are in doubt, just re-agendize it and talk about something later if it's not on the agenda. Don't proceed forward and then get yourself in a bind. If you notice on the agenda, I also made the template and I sent this out in an email. If you didn't get it and you reach out to me, I'll be more than happy to send you the template. But basically everything on this page, because I wanted to share it on Zoom, is the recommendation that we have on all of our agendas. And if anything is out of order, if I catch it, I will bug you and ask you for us to correct it. The reason why, if the advisory board sends me an agenda and it's out of order and I say, hey, can you please go correct it? It kind of can make you feel like infuriated, like, well, can you just correct it and send it back to me? The reason why I don't do that is because I don't know who you sent it to. And I want to make sure that your records are correct and that everything is fluent across, because if you print out agenda and it's not the same one that I gave you or you sent it out, then we can get into an open meeting law violation. So that's why when I say if there's something that needs to be corrected, I throw it back at you to make sure that we're all straight across the board. So homework, go home and review your agenda. So after, I don't know, every board's a little different. So you have a chair, vice chair, and secretary. Sometimes the chairs like to go through the emails and start constructing it. Sometimes they have the vice chair, sometimes they have the secretary. It doesn't matter to me who's the person who's drafting them. Typically it is the secretary or vice chair. But before you send them out for review, the chair always has to double check it before you send it to me to be posted. A good practice for you might be is this, if the secretary or vice chair is doing it, they forward it to the chair and the chair forwards it to me. But like I said, however you guys work that out between your boards, everyone's a little different, has different work schedules. You guys can work that out, but the one that comes to me, the chair has to be the one that approves it. If for some reason the chair is out of town, the vice chair has to approve it. So whoever, we'll say the secretary, is the person who goes through and drafts the agenda. Before you send it off to your chair, review everything and think about your language. Is this how I want this to read? Did I get everything out of my emails? Am I missing anything? Is this a for possible action? Is this for a report only? Is this for a presentation only? Ask yourself these questions. What do I want to come out of this item? Do I want an action or do I don't want an action? So just be clear and concise. And if you do have someone with a presentation, so say you get the sheriff's office to come, if you have an item for planning, you want to make sure that if you have someone to come and give you a presentation, you reach out to that person and you confirm it before you post your agenda. Typically, you do this a little bit beforehand, but just make sure that you are doing that, because if you don't want to get to your meeting and then that person not show up, or if you give them too short of notice, they may not be able to come. You can always pull the item from your agenda, but we ask that you do that confirmation before you post your agenda. Okay, so now that you sent in your agenda to me and I got it posted for you. So this is how the advisory boards work. Because of some of the different posting requirements, we came up with our own, but some like if the library board, for instance, or the school board or different GIDs, you're going to have a little bit a different posting because the advisory boards can't post the Lyon County website. I retain it and I will sign off that I'm the one that did it. So after you do have your agenda ready and you send it off to me to be posted, you're going to email the county clerks at lyoncounty.org 5 days prior. This is a new requirement. We used to only have to ask you to do it 24 hours before your posting time, but the reason why we're asking for 5 is recently we've seen some items that we want to give more consideration to. And I want to make sure, and Andrew wants to make sure that we're giving you the guidance that you need. And we don't want you to be in a position to where we need to come back and help you correct something or give you aid to later. So we want to give you that support beforehand. And Andrew's time is a little bit more intense than mine. So if I have to send it to him or the district attorney, they need a little bit more time to evaluate. So if there's something that I see that could be a little bit more of critical information that I need them for their review, I need a little bit more time for them to look at it. So we're asking for that 5 days. So the Saturday, Sunday doesn't count, a holiday doesn't count. So from your meeting, you need to count back that 5 days And that's due to us to be posted so that we can start that review. So as me as staff or whoever answers on that county clerks, we have 3 clerks. Shannon, myself, and Nicole out of the clerk's office. So like this week, I was out of the office for 3 days. All the agendas are going to go to all 3 of us simultaneously. So that way, if one of us is missing, someone else can look at the agenda and help you with it and get it posted. After we have reviewed your agenda and we know that we can go ahead and post it, we'll post it to the Lyon County State website and our board. And then we'll respond to you and say, your agenda has been posted at these locations so that you know that it was done. And then we retain that notice of posting. And why do we do that? We're the ones that did it. So the other boards, if you send out your, like if the fire districts, I don't know if anyone from here is on there, but the fire district will send it to myself, another person at Fernley, and over here and over here. They send us out a notice of posting, and every single person has to sign off that you did it at that location. And that's another reason why you cannot on your agenda just say, I posted at these locations. You have to have the date, time, and location of all those places. So you can't really put the time you posted it on the agenda because that kind of doesn't serve the purpose. We don't actually know what time you posted it because you already posted the agenda, correct? Kind of hard to do that.
What is time certain on the event?
So a time certain, if you're like on the Board of County Commissioners, if we're having someone come in and they're giving a presentation, for instance, and by a certain time, we're going to hear that item. It can't be before, it can be at that time or a little bit later. And that way, if we want to make sure that the public are going to hear it at that time, we don't do that for every agenda item because that would be really confusing, but it's very for special case sensitive situations. For the advisory boards, we ask that all of your record retention be done through Google Docs in your Google Drive. And the reason for that was we were coming up with issues in the past where if we had a chair leave and then we had a secretary leave and it was on their hard drive, on their personal computers, we were losing information. So the state library oversees our retention schedules. So while the Board of County Commissioners has a different retention schedule from the advisory boards and other boards, I just wanted to mention that you need to make sure that your retention schedule is being followed. So I would recommend if you don't know what it is, reach out to me and I can help you find what your retention schedule is for your items. But we need to make sure that the flow of information is being saved and we're not missing anything. Because like the AG says, you're an advisory board, you can't try, you must do. So that's why we came up with that. And then that way, if someone's missing and someone else is on vacation and someone else does the agenda, all the information is in one local spot. If there's other boards who want a little bit more information, how we put that together, I'd be happy to go over that with you a little bit later. Other boards will retain in their own principal office. So like I said, if you want some other backup information with the state library about your retention schedule, let me know. And I did hand out a notice of posting. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. So there is an example there for you. If you want to look at it, there's a template. Anything that I hand out today, just please email me if you want me to send you a Word copy for you to work off of. I'd be happy to do that. So like I said, it needs to be noted by the person who's doing it. It has to have their name. And if you are of a affiliation with an entity like the fire districts, the library board, or whoever, you also must put in there who you are. So if I was doing it, it'd be Aaron Lopez, an administrative assistant at Lyon County who's doing it. If you're, say, if you were a advisory board, how they used to, it would just been ISO, and so have done it at these locations. But if you're with an entity, you have to say who you are and what your affiliation is with it. So like Steve was talking about, all that criteria has to be in there. And all that is in the notice of posting template for you. A lot of questions I do get is if you have a website and say you're a GID and you post your business on there, you can post your agendas and your minutes on there. That's something you'd have to talk about with your IT. I'm not saying that you have to or that it's a requirement. If that is something that you want to look into, we would have to then deliberate those discussions with Steve. But if you do have a website, consider doing that because you may want to consider sharing that information with the public readily available, especially if when in our process, when we send out the agenda, we have an electronic way of sending out when something's posted, because again, the agenda is for the public. It's their notice that the meeting's happening. Everything in that information pertaining inside of it is for them. So if we have through Lyon County a way of electronically sending out these notices, I recommend that every single day up and down. And unless someone tells me they don't want to, then I give them another option. But I tell everyone, sign up this way. So that way, part of the notice requirement is if someone asks for sign up and to get signed up of your agenda, it goes straight to them as soon as I post it. So that's another reason why if your website has that capability, you can up that process for yourselves that way. So with us, since we have the principal office, we only have to do it in the 3 locations, at our principal office on our board for the public, on our website, and at the state, and then we only have to do those 3.
So I've heard a couple times mentioned that people go to listen to each other.
Mhm.
Is that just random? Anybody can just email you and say they like the agenda? You have to start clicking and the others.
So the question is if you get a request for help for agenda notices. So it lasts for 6 months, so they need to, if they can give it to you orally, they can send it to an email, they can send it through the mail, as long as you get the request. And then you can ask them, how do you want to receive it? And then I always really highlight, I love this way because you get the information automatically. So then I give them the information, this is how you sign up on our website. So that's how we facilitate it. So if you get that information and you don't have it set up electronically, then whoever is in charge of sending out disseminating information, if you're doing it through email, you would have to take that email information and you would have to do it for at least 6 months to send it to them. So every time you send out information, they would need to be included in that group email with you. Automatically. Yeah, and then that way, any information that's given automatically gets sent to them. If there's a notice of cancellation, a change in meeting, it automatically goes to them and I don't have to monitor it. I actually have my own email set up with the Board of County Commissioners because I want to make sure that that email went sent out because I want to double check, but that's how you would do it. If you ever come across a point in time to where if you are doing it manually, at 6 months, you have to send them a notice saying your agenda request is going to expire on this date. And then at the next meeting, you have to say it's going to expire on this date. So after the 2 that you send out with the agenda, on the 3rd one, you can actually stop sending it to them if they don't respond to it. So it gets a little complicated. So if at that point, you're kind of like, Aaron, I got a letter request, what I do, just like reach out to me and I'll help you figure it out. So this is why I say electronically is best because then you don't have to monitor it. Makes it easy. I have another handout for you and it's to draft your minutes. So over the years, I met with quite a few clerks and I tried to refine this process as much as possible because knowledge is power. And if you are a secretary, you know how much you want to get this done as fast and efficiently as possible. So if you take your agenda and you take your minutes, what you're going to do is keep your template the same every single month. And you're going to transfer over the action items over to here. So what would you start with on this one specifically? It would be number 6 because that's the first action item. So we would just interchangeably change the middle of the body. Because everything else is if you keep everything fluid, it's going to stay the same at the beginning and the end. So roll call, public participation, pledge of allegiance, all that is always going to be the same. You're just changing the middle of your body. So you don't have to recreate a new template every single month. So it's a couple of things that we want to point out is please fill out the motions beforehand. Because I don't know if some of your secretaries are doing it by hand or if some of you are, doing it on a computer. But for me, the most information I can have done ahead of time makes everything on the back end when I'm working on it that much faster. So we like to have everything drafted. If you don't have that possibility, I just take the agenda and I write who did the first, who did the second, and what was the vote. But if you have that capability, even before your meeting and you're not going to do it and you're not going to type it out, have this pre-done before your meeting, print it out, and then you can also write it on your draft minutes. And if that motion changes, you can make the note on it. But 9 times out of 10, whatever is on here, your motion is more than likely going to stay the same. So on here, on your draft minutes, it's almost the same as the agenda. So the date, time, and place of the meeting, the members of attendance. So I'm just gonna go back real quick. If you look at roll call, and we're gonna say who's present at the meeting. If you have teleconference, we like to put on there who was on teleconference. If you get to a part in your meeting minute where someone leaves, or if there's an issue, someone cut out, and because of electronical reasons, and you have to note that, it's really important if you have that they're on via Zoom or telecommunications so that you can note that and people aren't confused when they're reading it. And also if you're tracking mileage, that's really helpful as a clerk if you have to go back and check if you get per diem for traveling time. So that's the other reason why we put it on there, so we can help facilitate that end. Also, if someone's absent, that's a must, and you must also put on there if they're excused or not excused. Because in some bylaws, for some boards, if you miss so many meetings, then they can call to order an action to remove you as a member. So as a chair, when you're going through this meeting and you're chairing it, you need to note in the meeting, so this person's here by Zoom, and this person was absent and they're excused or not excused. You don't have to say why they're excused or not excused. If it's something like, hey, my kid has all-stars and they're playing in a game and I can't make this meeting, you don't have to disclose that for everyone. You could if you want to be polite, but you don't necessarily have to if someone has a doctor's appointment. But if someone no calls, no show, that would be a reason to say that they are not excused. Did you have a question?
Yeah, question. Who has the authority to excuse them?
The chair is going to note that. Yeah. Yeah, or vice chair if they're handling the meeting. So the question was, who has the authority to mark if they're excused or not excused? It's the chair who will make that statement. Okay. So our minutes are not going to be verbatim. So I have a system to where if whoever has that agenda item and they're bringing it up for presentation. So Andrew is talking about something on the county manager's agenda item. I'm going to say County Manager Andrew Haskin gave a report and a summary of what he said. Anything pertinent that needs to be noted in the minutes, I'm going to say. I'm not going to say every single word he said and write it verbatim because that would be really hard to transcribe and no one wants to do that. It's very, very tedious work, but just give an accurate summary. Why any data that he gives you, it costs this much, they requested a reduction in this much. So you just want to give a very close, accurate summary. Then on the second paragraph, I'll write any discussion or deliberation. If, let's say the board members go back and forth and they discuss, well, this is an idea and this is an idea. I'm not going to write in everyone's ideas and discussions. But when it starts getting down to pertinent information where they're starting to get to a point to where they may deliberate to an action, I'm going to put in there, the commissioners and staff had this discussion, or the board members had this discussion. And these are the points of they're in favor and they were not in favor. And then this was the reasoning factor of why they came to this answer. And then the motion. So theoretically, you could do it in 3 paragraphs, the presenter, the summary, and then the motion. If there's something very pertinent, so say, Commissioner Keller says, this is why I'm requesting this. And it's very pertinent information to note that he's the one that said it for a very particular reason. I will say that that commissioner noted it for that particular reason. I'm not going to know every single person's discussion unless it has a very pertinent pertaining issue to that item. Just want to make sure I got everything on here. Yes. Exactly, yeah. So Scott Keller just mentioned that do not do an interpretation of someone else says. Also, you want to be very careful of is your grammar, because I've read this before. If you write something and you miss something in your grammar, because it happens to all of us, have someone else read your draft notes, because sometimes it's very easy to miss. So make sure that we're, being as accurate we can with what we're dictating on the notes, and not, if you don't understand something, or you may perceive something indifferently. Sometimes when you're in a live meeting, you are hearing one thing and then you're hearing another thing. And sometimes when you go back to the audio, reflect what and if you don't quite understand it, reflect back to the audio. So what we're getting to at this point, everything with the audio, the minutes, and the agenda, all three of those things should match. So as you go through your meeting and the chair opens the meeting, everything, you should be able to, off the audio, recreate an agenda and recreate your minutes. So all those things should be fluid across. And minutes should reflect what also happened in the meeting. One point I want to make is if someone comes to a meeting, they have to leave early, you need to reflect that person left and the time that they left. And so if there's any questions about something, about a reflection of what happened in the meeting, there's a lot of details that we could dive into, but that's the most important one that I want to know, because that one will affect the votes later on. So if you have a 5-member board, someone leaves, then your votes following that item are going to be, we'll say 4-0 instead of 5-0. So that's the most important one I can think of off the top of my head. Just the meeting should reflect what happened. If you go into a recess, at some point in if they were going to go into a closed session for something and you were in the middle of an item, because they can do that on particular ones, not all of them, you need to reflect that the commissioners went to closed meeting at this time. They came back out at this time. So time is always very an efficient tool to be noting on your agenda. I just wanted to put this up here for 2 reasons. One, for everyone on Zoom who may not have the minutes and what they need and kind of what we talked about in a little bit bigger screen. But also another part of the advisory boards is to send in a letter of transmittal for the Board of County Commissioners. So I just wanted to give 2 things that usually is a little bit easier to understand. So during public participation, item number 3, Cindy Smith reported that they're speeding. So if you get information like that, if you don't tell anyone and you just put it in your minutes, I may miss it, the other clerks may miss it to send it off. So if you send in your letter of transmittal, there's 2 points. One, it gives us direction of where it needs to go in a more detail. So this is just one line because we're just capturing the substance. So letter transmittal, it gives us more of a report. We want more direction from you, why you're pro or con or need help with something. So give us more. Also on number 9, another thing is planning applications that advisory boards get. So everyone, if you don't have a template of a letter of transmittal, let me know and I can get that to you. What we want to know is your date of the meeting, what advisory board you are, where you want this to go, and then what your agenda item was. So what it read on your agenda, you just have to copy and paste it on here. If it is a report, like on this one with Cindy Smith reported, you can see on here, I gave more information than I did on the minutes. Because on the minutes, we don't have to normally give as much, just the consensus of what she talked about. So the letter of transmittal, I want to show you, give us more information, who, what, when, where, and why you're sending this to us. And then that way it just helps the flow of communication so that someone else doesn't have to reach out, and maybe answer more questions, or they can give you more information before they reach out to you. And once again, if the secretary is doing this, the chair does need to review it before it goes in.
See on those is both the positive and negative stuff on the board members. A lot of board it would sometimes go, it's a 3-5 vote, and so it passes a recommendation to deny or approve something. I want to know what the other items that came up. So that I have more to make an opinion. So if you could give more information on this, it's really helpful.
So if anyone didn't hear that online, Commissioner Keller was saying how helpful it was. The more information, pros and cons that you give him can help him make an idea of what he needs to do to help with the information or to make a decision with the information. So it's helpful and then the other people of the public also get to read this from your point of view. Because we will attach them to the Board of County Commissioners agendas. So number 9 on the zoning map amendment request. One thing that we do need also on your minutes and on here is if you are recommending denial or approval. So you're not approving an item, you're giving a recommendation of your board's support or non-support. So as an advisory board capacity, you're giving them recommendations for your community, but you're not approving or denying an application. And then as you can see on here, it's just, I gave some really quick notes. You obviously can go over, my slide's not that big, but anything that if you are in favor of or not, put on there. Anything that the public was in favor of or not, put on there, and how your board came to that conclusion. If you just send us a motion, there's really not a lot that they're going to be able to read between the lines. So give the story. One question that we had this year that we wanted to review, there are times to where the advisory board will make a recommendation, like we don't like this project, we don't feel like it fits in our community character. We don't like where it's located, some things like that. And then you're forwarded over to the planning commission. If it's a planning hearing item, the planning commission will hear it. They'll get your information. If you don't get it to the planning commission in time, say like your meetings are too close together and you didn't have time to get it in, it will go to the Board of County Commissioners. So when it goes to the planning commission, they're going to review it. They're going to hear staff's presentation. They're going to hear whoever is presenting it, if it's the applicant or if they have someone doing it for them. Staff's job is to also advise the planning commission and the Board of County Commissioners what they can or can't do legally. So there's some other documents that they have to use to make this determination. And then the commissioners take that into advisement. And the planning commissioners take that into advisement. And so sometimes that's why your recommendation of denial or approval may change. And that's like the most simplest way that I can explain that.
We just had one sent to us not too long ago where the CAP said, we voted on legal findings and found them to be right. However, we'd like to put this in, so they put it in favor of it, but they wanted it also list their concerns.
Could you, I didn't quite hear all that. Would you say that? And I don't want to try to reiterate what you just said. And if you can say who you are, it may even help the conversation.
My name is Sir Mark Jones. One of the advisory boards sent us, I'm on the planning commission, response that said, we reviewed the legal findings and find that they were correct. Doesn't mean we liked it, but we found they were correct. So we voted in favor of the findings. But we also would like to add this little tidbit to it, saying we had a little concern about this and a little bit of concern about that. But they voted on the findings and approved it. So, and then you can do both. So it's not just one or the other.
So I think if I'm understanding him correctly, like if you said you didn't like something because it created an issue with this, then they created an extra finding. What's the other one I'm thinking of? Condition.
Mhm.
They can also create a separate condition if it's within the realm that they can, because sometimes they can't. If it's in a legal realm that they can create that and helps in support of your recommendation. Doesn't happen all the time. There's some very sticky criteria in between. I don't get paid for that. I just kind of understand how it works. So once again, if you're the secretary filling this out, please make sure that you forward it to your chair before you turn it in to make sure that it's correct and that it's what you want going forward.
Aaron, you had a hand up on Zoom.
Oh, did I? Melinda, if you want to hold on to your question and as soon as I get my presentation down, I will call on you right away, promise. So canceling a meeting. I've had a couple of questions on this process over the last year, so I just kind of wanted to touch on this. So there may be a couple of different criterias. You know that before you go to your meeting, you're not going to have one because you've had, we'll say 2 or 3 people call in and they say that they can't attend. So because you meet on a regularly scheduled time and for the purposes of making sure that the people who come to your regularly scheduled meetings are notified, we ask that you send in a notice of cancellation. And the reason why we do this is because all of our notifications are done electronically. And also because we post it online so that the community knows that if you cancel your meeting beforehand, it's posted somewhere that they can see that it's not happening. So basically everything in that box is everything that I need. There are some templates that I handed out for you to use. So this is basically everything inside that box. That's all I need. So it's the exact same replica of the name of your board, the date and time, the location of the meeting, the address, and that the notice is that your meeting is canceled. The other way that you would still need to send this in is if you did post your agenda and prior to the meeting, the same thing happened. You know that you're not going to have a quorum. You're going to post it beforehand. So I'm going to post this to the websites and also our board. If
Cancel within 24 hours.
no, well, we still have to cancel it no matter what. So say if you are not doing things electronically, you need to go down to the office of the location where your meeting is, and you still need to post this physically. Or you need to write wherever it's been posted, canceled, across the agenda. And if it's right before the meeting, and so you show up and no one's there, you need to leave at least one person outside the building and just put like a piece of paper if you can outside, even if it is your agenda, leave that on the door if you can. If not, minimally have someone wait for at least 15 minutes so that you can just notify people that it's been canceled. But the same rules apply with your agenda. If you cancel a meeting, you have to post this. For all advisory boards, please make sure that you send it to the county clerk's email. Because like I said, if one of us isn't there, the other one will help.
I'm wondering who has authority to cancel meetings? And there are certain cases like there's not going to be a quorum that it must be canceled. Are there other occasions where it's maybe not clear about whether a meeting should be canceled or not?
So
There
let's-
was an occasion elsewhere in Nevada where the chair of a board couldn't make it.
So
And
let's,
so they canceled the meeting, even though there would have been a quorum there without them.
okay, so let's talk about officers for a second. You'll have a chair, vice chair, and secretary. Typically, almost always, the chair is the one who's going to cancel the meeting if the chair and vice chair. Okay, let me back up. So the chair is the one who's usually in control. So he will know if he doesn't have a quorum. That's one instance. The second one is you can't have a meeting if there's a quorum, if there isn't a vice chair or chair, because then you have no one else to facilitate the meeting. That's the only 2 instances that I'm aware of that you can cancel a meeting if there would otherwise be a quorum present. Does that answer that?
Yes.
Okay, so the other important reason that I wanted to stress that everyone gets a little stressed about is I need this. If you send me an email and you say, Aaron, please cancel our meeting, I'm going to say, please send me a notice of cancellation. And the reason why that is I will post this to the website and that goes out electronically and I post it on the board so that everyone knows that the meeting has been canceled. The other really important part of this is for Billy Milligan that works over in the comptroller's office. She will review your minutes and see if anything's been canceled. because they pay for advisory board and board members to have meetings. So every single person who sits there, they pay a fee for that meeting per person. So that's why we're a stickler also about is if who's in attendance, whether it's in person or Zoom or not, because if she doesn't know who's there or not, then she's potentially paying for a person who is not there. So that's another reason why staff on our side is a stickler to make sure that our information is being correct. So you have a cancellation of meeting and you get to your meeting and you didn't know that certain people or certain person wasn't showing up and you don't have a quorum. So how do you cancel that meeting? What you're going to do and what we've came up with the process to do to help you go through this system is you're still going to start your recording because we have to have a record. We can't just have something floating out there and not have any minutes or any record whatsoever that it was canceled. So we want you to start your recording. You're going to go through it like you normally would. I'm going to say this date and time of the Silver Springs Advisory Board. We're calling this meeting to order and we're going to do the roll call of determination. So-and-so and so-and-so is not here. So-and-so and so-and-so is absent. We are going to cancel this meeting because we do not have a quorum. Then you're going to take that and reflect that onto your minutes. And your board can approve it because the people who were there know that they were there and the people who weren't there know that they weren't there. So we have an accurate record of on audio and then also on your minutes of who in there wasn't there. The other important piece of that is if we're excusing or not excusing someone of that meeting, then we can also have documentation of that discussion, that approval of that minutes. So it's really for documentation purposes and that we understand, and if that the community understands that of what happened and why that meeting was canceled. So roles and responsibility of the CAB members, and then also my roles and responsibilities to you. So we'll start off by, as we talked about, the 3 appointed people on your board. So every year annually in January at your first board meeting, what your first action items are going to be appointing the chair, vice chair, and secretary. So the chair's responsibility for the year is, if you think about it as a tree, the chair is going to make sure everything that follows underneath that person is done. So if you appoint a secretary, the chair can oversee that the secretary is doing their work. So I can't necessarily go after the secretary for doing something. You're going to have to help me and say, hey, we need you to do this in the support of this and for this reason. So the chair's responsibility for all retention documents, agendas, and audio in your files. Facilitating board meetings, so they open it, they make sure that it's running fluidly. If there's any disruption within the board members, if they're fighting, then that person has to kind of be like the sounding board to help get the meeting back on order. If the public's being unruly, then they have to be that sounding board of that person to keep the meeting flowing. So the chair's responsibility during the meeting is to make sure that we want to keep the operation going as smoothly as possible. They are going to review the agendas, minutes, and to make sure that all that in the letter transmittal is what wants to be submitted and for final retention purposes. They are supposed to be in charge of the email and correspondence. So including any backup for materials and scheduling presenters and communicating with the board of county commissioners and BOCC. So with that being said, they have the top tier responsibility, but they can delegate and ask the vice chair or secretary, I'm going to delegate these tasks for you and these tasks for you. So basically you have a supervisor and then 2 other people who are their right hand and left hand man to get the board functions done. Overly with the vice chair and secretary during the meeting, they're supposed to make sure that we're following open meeting law and that they're giving that support to the chair, because it can be kind of cumbersome when you have so many different actions and things going on. They may miss a step and you say, hey, did we do public participation on this? I heard a first, I didn't hear the second. So they're supposed to make sure that whatever is being ran through the meeting is also being documented and recorded correctly. So the vice chair is also the backup to the chair. So if the chair is absent for whatever reason, the vice chair can take over the meeting. So if the chair did start a meeting and the chair had to leave early, the vice chair can then take over at that time. If he's not going to be there indefinitely for that month, the vice chair can help out and take over that responsibility. The secretary, however, cannot. So if during the meeting something were to happen, or you had a change in, say, we had 2 resignation 1 month and one was the chair and the vice chair, the secretary can't start the meeting. She can't take over. So only the chair and vice chair can facilitate meetings. But ultimately, she's the support of those 2 roles, or he or she is the support of those 2 roles. So she helps monitor, she can draft agenda and minutes. Like I said, the record retention task can be delegated to her by the chair, and also the respondents for email. And any other, if you needed to, scheduling, things like that, the chair can ask for those responsibilities. I just say within your boards, make sure that you clear and define what those roles are and who's supporting and doing what. So interactions with the county manager's office will primarily be myself. So if you have a question that you want to go directly to me, send it to my email. But if it's a broad scope spectrum that one of the other clerks can help you with, use the county clerk's email. When in doubt, just use the county clerk's email. I'm going to get it every time. But my job is to help you with administrative assistance. So if you have a question about anything, you can reach out to me, or I help you find the answer to get you to the right person. If you need paper, ink, audio devices, things like that, reach out to me. I make sure that you get the supplies that you need for your board. I've helped to make sure that I'm facilitating the floor between you, staff, and the board members to make sure that everyone's communicating. That is my job, but also we also have to make a statement that's saying it's also really important to you have these relationships with your Board of County Commissioners, that if there's something that you need to communicate with them, reach out to them too. If you need to have a one-on-one with them, they're there for you too. So reach out to the commissioner in your district. Doesn't mean that all that info, everything has to go directly through me, but if you have a concern about something, you should always feel free to reach out to them directly also. They do love to see your faces at the board meetings, even if it's on Zoom. So if the chair or vice chair can come to a meeting and give a oral report, they love to see your faces there. And I think that's about that. So best practices, if you do need to ask staff to come to one of your meetings, we ask for at least a 2 weeks notification. They do get pretty busy, the department heads, with other meetings and such. And then they also may need time to prepare for whatever meeting, depending on what your request is, to get the information that you need for that meeting. So at minimum, we ask for 2 weeks, but as soon as you know, please let us know if you can give us more time. So we did utilize the Google Docs and the Drive for all CAB members. It's the chair, vice chair, and secretary's responsibility to monitor those. They need to make sure that if something needs to be disseminated to all your board members, to forward that email if it's not an agenda item. So like today's training class, we ask, please forward this to your other advisory board members so that they know that this is going on. But if it's something that pertains to the meeting itself, they need to make sure that your other board members get that meeting. So if the chair isn't the one that's going to be reviewing the emails consistently, who is and who's in charge of it? We find that the 3 people that are the appointed for that office or for that board are the ones that should be, is what we find is the best practice. So not everyone is inundated and, you have 5 people on the board, so one person logs in and the next person logs in and we don't know who's on first base. So that's why we say it's the best practice for at least one person to really be in charge of monitoring it, but all 3 have access to it. And then the chair decides who's the person who's going to be the primary person who's going to be monitoring that email to make sure that the board business is being facilitated. So that's up to every board how they want to set up that up. wanted to put on there the best practices to keep making sure that you submit your meeting cancellation. That's been a little bit confusing this year, so I just wanted to highlight that again. So please, at some point, even if after your meeting you had to cancel it, please let me know so that even if it's the day after and you got to your meeting, send it to me the next morning so that I can send out that email notification if it happened to happen that night, so we can keep an accurate record. We want you to save your retention documents in audio monthly. So that's your agenda, your minutes, and your audio. So after every single meeting, make sure that your agenda has been posted in there in your retention file, your minutes, and your audio. Because if I get a public request, information request, I have to legally respond within 5 days. We won't get into public information requests. But so you have access to that information, I have access to that information, and I don't have to bug you to go get it. If you're putting it in there right after your meeting, I can just download the file and send it out. And then I also need to post that to the website. Whatever's been approved with your final minutes, I need an email sent to me after your meeting saying, hey, Erin, here's the attachment for the minutes. Please make sure that this gets posted. And I post that right afterwards. We talked about your letter of transmittal with the Board of County Commissioners and communication with them. And once again, the Board of County Commissioners love it when you attend their meetings and give your own report. So who are the county commissioners and also their websites and emails and things like that? So if you don't already know, I just wanted to give you the list of their emails so that you can contact them if you need to reach out to them. And a little bit of information about them is they are the legally governing body of Lyon County. There are 5 members on that board, and they can be contacted email or letter transmittal. We do also have their county issued cell phones on our website if you would also like that, but in a lot of cases, the emails work great. And then this is the websites where we find all of our information to help you with. It's a lot. So I just wanted to share the websites with you, but the agendas are all posted on the Lyon County website in the handbook. And I also have the link to the open meeting law on there. On the CAB website on the Lyon County for you, I have your bylaws and all the applicable information for you to find if you want any information. I post everything online, so you have a live link if you ever want to go back to it. The Nevada State website for open meeting law, Nevada revised statutes. If you ever want to get into that in-depth read, that's there for you. And I think that's going to conclude everything I have for you, including the AG's office. You can always reach out to them. There's nothing that says you can't. So once again, I just put on here our emails. And if you can, please remember to use the county clerks at lyoncounty.com or .org, excuse me, if you are submitting anything that we need to post for you, so that one of the clerks, if I'm not available, there's someone else to help get that information posted for you. So at this time, I will open it up for questions. If you do have a question, I would appreciate if you can come up here so that people on Zoom can hear. And then we can kind of go over that one-on-one. So I will go with Melinda first, since I know you've been waiting.
Yes, hi Erin, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Could you please clarify again for me how we send our recommendations to the Planning Commission?
So in the motion, the way that staff sends it to you as when they send you the monthly agenda item, it says roughly off the top of my head, to forward a recommendation, I believe, to the Planning Commission or the county commissioners. I can't remember which one it is. And you should put in there if it should be for you're sending in a recommendation to approve the application or a recommendation to deny it. So it depends on what your board, whoever made the motion, if your board members agree with that motion or not, is going to be the deciding factor. And then we want also, especially if it was a split vote, we want to know why it was split and what was the reasoning behind the justification that you're sending this in so that then the Board of County Commissioners and Planning Commission know how your board came to that conclusion. So we want to hear what the board deliberated, and we want to hear whatever public participation. And you don't have to send in, like this person said this, and this person said this, and this person said this. It can be a summary of public participation, pros were, they liked the location. A con was, it wasn't great access to the highway. You know, so you can give a summary of what was said. You don't have to verbatim say what every single person said. Does that help answer your question?
No, I really want to know, I can put together a summary, I can do that with the recommendation. However, how do I send it to the planning commission? Who do I send it to?
It goes through staff as it always did. So if you still send it to the county clerk's email, it will always go to all three of us.
Perfect.
That's all.
Okay,
Sorry,
thank you.
that was really simple.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone else? What was my presentation that great? I doubt it. Okay, so Cameron. Hoffman?
Yes, hello, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, question for you. This was such a mandatory meeting, but there was no roll call. No, how do you know we attended? Where
Great
is the?
Great question. I appreciate that.
Yeah, because
So,
both-
yeah, this is my plan. What I want to do is, because some of you are on Zoom and some of you are here in person, and then there's some majority that have to watch this video later. What I wanted to do was put onto the advisory board's agenda, basically was the roll call in your minutes so that we can actively reflect. So, I'm still kind of tinkering how I want to do this, but my thought is at your next meeting will just be a report from the county manager's office to the advisory boards that the video has been posted online, and here's the link and the information. And then we would like on your next meeting to have basically a roll call or attendance of who attended in person, who attended via Zoom, and then who watched the video later. And then that way you can just send in one nice complete sheet. Because I think in years past, it got kind of cumbersome and confusing. So I was just going to have the board as a whole review that together. And then that way too, the chairman and vice chair will also know who participated and who did not.
Yeah, because I don't see hardly anybody from our board associated
Well,
with this.
Correct. So that could be correct. So what we will do is we'll send out the video and say, because some people can't make it on Saturday, some people work, some people are out of the states. Some people, have, very significant life events happening today, and we understand that can happen. It's hard to get this big of a group of people to attend. So that's why we are setting up this system in the way that we have.
Okay, so it is more lenient then. All right, thank you very much.
Yep. Is there any other questions for me?
Before we take a break, my presentation is going to be on planning, and planning items, just kind of a general overview. So I know there's a few boards here that don't deal with those. If you're on the Citizens Advisory Board or, something that deals with that, please stay. But, for boards like the Library Board and others that don't deal with that, if you're welcome to, if you want, but you don't have to.
Okay, so we will pause this and we will come back at 11:55 for Andrew, our county manager presentation.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started again. I'm Andrew Haskin. I'm the county manager. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about planning, and planning items and how they relate to cabs. To wrap the meeting up, let's see. So it's not showing. There we go. So, so I'm just gonna cover a few basic topics about planning. We're gonna talk about master plan, land use designation, zoning, findings, public process, and then different development rights. If you were here for my presentation last year, it's nearly identical. So but it's a good refresher. So to get into it, so talk a little bit about master plan, land use designations. And so the master plan provides a framework for how the county should develop in the future. It is not regulatory in nature, meaning that it doesn't designate which rights a property owner has to do with their property. So for instance, your land use, your designation in the master plan could be totally different than what your zoning is. The zoning is what designates what rights you currently have with your property. The land use designation dictates how that could be changed, how you as the property owner could apply for a zoning amendment and change that in the future. Master plans are advisory in nature, serving to guide the community at a policy level and to guide future development decisions, and as I already stated, the zoning is what is regulatory in nature. The master plan is created based off of community input. There's a process that we go through every 10 years or so to update that master plan. A lot of community meetings, obviously, that, you know, the planning commission and the board of county commissioners have a lot of meetings on it. The document itself is actually the planning commission's document under state law. The planning commission then forwards that to the board of county commissioners, and it's up to the board of county commissioners to adopt that master plan or send it back to the planning commission for revision. So talk about zoning. Zoning is a set of laws or regulations that govern how a property can and can't be used in a specific geographic location. As I said before, zoning determines what rights you have with your property. The county cannot change zoning on a property without the permission of the owner. It represents a taking, which the county can't do. That's a changing of your rights without the owner's say. A little bit different than a master plan amendment because when the master plan is updated, changes can be made to what the community would want to look like in the future. For a property owner to change zoning, the new proposed zoning must be compatible with the master plan, and that's really important. That's why the master plan is really so important for trying to figure out how things should look in the future, where, you know, okay, maybe in this area we need industrial, and maybe in this area we need commercial. That's all kind of determined by the master plan, and then the property owners have that ability based on that to seek a zoning change if they meet the findings and the requirements of that to do a zone change. So all planning processes have findings. I shouldn't say all. Most planning processes have a list of findings, which are conditions that have to be met for approval of that item. That's really what's determined by the board or the planning commission to decide whether or not a project should be approved, whether it be a master plan amendment, a zone change, a conditional use permit, different things there. And so there's an example here. So the findings for a zoning map amendment are listed below. One of them is that the proposed amendment will not be inconsistent with the master plan. It has to be compatible with the master plan. And so we talked a little bit about that. Each different application type within planning can have its own set of findings. So for instance, a master plan amendment has its own set of findings, and they're quite a bit different than this. Master plan amendments are a little bit more, the findings are a little bit more subjective, whereas this is very much, you know, does it meet this requirement? Yes or no? And so, you know, two of them, by the way, on this, I kind of skipped over it, but A in there is also related to the master plan, and it says, you know, is the zone change consistent with master plan, with the policies in the master plan? So
I think it's important. No, I think we're sitting in there
Uh-huh.
with the actual or master plan adjacent.
Correct. Yeah.
Things around that area. could be cattle, adjacent to.
Yeah, so really what that's getting at is from a planning perspective, we don't generally approve spot zoning. So if you're completely surrounded by agricultural land or rural residential or something, probably not gonna, recommend approval for apartments or for industrial necessarily or something like that. I mean, there are circumstances where that may make sense, but in general, that's making sure that there's compatibility between different land uses, whether it's master planned or the zoning. So before the first shovel of dirt can be moved this is for a subdivision, the subdivision map has to be recorded in order to split the parcel into larger parcels. There are several steps that have to be completed before that can happen. And the citizens advisory boards may not necessarily see all of those steps and all of the work that goes into that prior to it going to your board. But you might be involved with several of those steps. For instance, if it's a master plan amendment, those are always going to go to the citizens advisory board. Same with the zoning amendment and a tentative subdivision map. Final subdivision map, not necessarily. Those don't go to the citizen advisory boards. Those actually don't go to the planning commission or the county commission anymore. Those are approved administratively, provided they meet all the conditions within that subdivision. And so, you'll notice it says if necessary, not every project is going to require a master plan amendment. If their project is already compliant with either the master plan, let's just say they're going for they need a zone change, and it's already compliant with the master plan, then they won't need to do that step. Or let's just say their zoning is already compliant with what they're wanting to do. Even if it doesn't match the master plan, they still have the right to do that. So they wouldn't need either of those two. So, that's where staff, when they get, an application in, even before we get an application in, we'll typically sit down with a potential applicant, project developer, whatever the case may be, and have a conversation with them. We do what's called a roundtable, where planning staff will sit down, we'll have somebody from roads, utilities, fire, all the different entities that'll have to approve of that application are invited to those. And we sit down and we discuss what types of approvals they're going to have to do, what is their vision for the project, and then what are the steps that it would have to go through, whether it be a master plan amendment or zone change or any of these. So that happens before an application's even submitted usually. So a tentative subdivision map, and I want to highlight, this is by no means all of the types of applications that you might see. These are just the most common ones. But a tentative subdivision map is a map to show the design of a proposed subdivision and the existing conditions in and around it. The Board of County Commissioners add conditions to the tentative map and approve tentative maps. The Planning Commission can also add conditions to it, but it has to be consistent with county code. We can't add arbitrary conditions that aren't in county code. We can request that the applicant voluntarily add that, but it can't be something that is used against them as far as approving or not approving their project. If the zoning is correct and the development standards can be met through the conditions placed on the map, it's difficult for the board to deny that application. And this is something that I know we get a lot of frustration sometimes with citizens advisory boards or just citizens in the community. They see, well, you approved this subdivision or you approved this or that. Well, yeah, their zoning was correct. They had the right to do that with their property. They could meet all of the standards that we have out in code. So there's no legal reason to turn them down. And so that's where, again, we hear that from time to time, but it's something that we have to really pay attention to.
So this is the public hearing process for an planning item. I'm not gonna go through this all the way. This is, obviously, it's a fairly complex process. We get a lot of questions about how come we can't get a staff report to a citizen advisory board earlier? Oftentimes it's just because of the way this process works. It takes quite a bit of time to go and do that. We have to give 21 days for the outside entities to review that item. But meanwhile, state law only gives us, depending on the item, 30 or 60 days or 45 to hear that and come to a conclusion with it. So we run into that quite frequently, where, we're scrambling to try and get all the documentation and paperwork together to get it sent over to the Citizen Advisory Board so that we can meet all those deadlines. I just ask that the cabs be patient with that process, and we do our best. I promise we're actively trying to get that to you so that the cabs can have their input on the project, but sometimes it just doesn't happen based on let's say I'm waiting for an outside entity to submit their comments back for their review. Like, we have to wait that 21 days before we can send it out. Sometimes they get it all back to us in a week or two, and then we can move a little bit faster. So most of the time when there's those conflicts, we are waiting on some outside entity. Staff is pretty good about having their staff report mostly done. They can draft up most of it, but obviously those comments have to be included as a part of that. So anyway, if anyone is interested, I have this as a handout that I can email to you. Like I said, it's pretty complex. So why does it seem like staff always recommends approval? Well, staff says no frequently. Those projects just don't make it to public hearings. I cannot tell you how many roundtable meetings I have been to where we tell the applicant, I'm sorry, this just isn't going to work here. Or we tell them, you could do it, but it's going to take, this, and this to make it work. And, they make the determination then that it might be cost prohibitive. An example of that would be, we had somebody that wanted to do a self-storage unit in a place, and the fire department said, hey, you guys are going to have not only fire sprinklers, but you're going to have a fire hydrant on site. Well, there was no water line on that side of the highway, so they could do it, but they would have to spend millions of dollars to go under Highway 50 to put that in. The cabs and the boards are never going to see those, they're not likely to see those projects if the applicant doesn't move forward. So the ones that you are seeing are the ones that staff has been working with them oftentimes for 6 months to a year in advance, trying to, go back and forth and say, you need to meet this standard, you need to do this, you need to do that. Companies are rarely going to file a formal application if they know that staff is going to be recommending denial to the boards. It has happened. We had a couple this last year that staff recommended denial. The planning commission recommended denial, and I don't even know if they made it to the county commission. They might have, but if they did, the county commission denied the project. I mean, it's very, they'd have to have a very good reason to prove it. If staff saying, hey, this doesn't meet county code, staff would have had to have missed something on that. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but in general, it doesn't happen often. As I touched on, by the time an item has reached the CAB, the planning commission, or the BOCC, staff has reviewed the project several times to make sure that the project meets the findings and development standards. And that's really key. And one of the questions I get from citizen advisory boards is, okay, so why are we looking at it if you're saying that it already meets all the standards? It kind of goes back to what I already said. Sometimes we miss stuff. Sometimes, depending on where it's located, my community development staff may not live in that community, right? They may not know that there's circumstances there, they may not, just not be aware that, hey, this traffic, this, stop sign has issues or something. There might be something there that we need to take a look at, and that's where that input from the Citizen Advisory Board and the community is really important, so that we can go back and say, hey, is this an issue? The board, I know when they see those types of things on the reports, they look at those heavily. Same with the planning commission. And so, sometimes staff will take a look at it and say, you know what, you're right, we missed this. We need to go back to the applicant and get further clarification. Or, staff will say, actually it does meet the standard and here's why. But I think those are really important. We want to make sure that we're doing development right in the county. Yes, sir.
It's a development versus just a property owner building something on their property. What?
Oh, a property owner building something on their property is development. It just different scale, right? So, basically anytime you're changing the land use, you're, building buildings, all that stuff would constitute development. For some stuff, the process is a lot more simple. So obviously if you're going to build a house, right, you don't, and your property is zoned residential, you don't have to go through all these processes. You don't need a zone change. You don't need any of that stuff. You can go apply for your building permit and build your house. But if it's something that requires a zone change, a master plan amendment, any kind of parcel split, conditional use permits, a number of other different items, that's where there's public processes involved. So, yeah. So one of the questions that we get often is, where's the water coming from? The board, gets questions about that all the time with developments, and really, Lyon County doesn't regulate water rights. That's up to the Nevada Division of Water Resources. So, water rights are based on water that's available in the hydrographic basin, and there's different types of water rights, ground and surface water rights. So they're a property right, much like anything else. And so Lyon County can't say, well, yes, you've got these water rights, but we don't think that there's enough water. That's not for our board to determine. That's up to the Nevada Division of Water Resources, which, by the way, they sign off on any property split. That's something that has to be done. That's one of those outside entities that reviews things. For every new lot that is created, water rights must be permanently dedicated to that lot. Meaning once that lot's created, you can't transfer that water anymore. On larger lots, it's 2 acre-feet per lot created. On smaller lots, there's a formula. It depends on the size of the lot and a few other things. So, but generally it's kind of right around that 2 acre-feet. I mean, I think it can go down to as little as 1, but that's something that again, the state water engineer determines how that would work. It touches on this a little bit. So sometimes those water rights get dedicated to the utility if it's in an area that has utilities, and sometimes they get dedicated to the state water engineer if it's for a well. So that's why, when you go to drill a well, that's those water rights are generally already there. There are circumstances that's not the case, but water and sewer utilities. So projects have to have adequate water and wastewater to serve the development. The developer takes responsibility for any water and wastewater line extensions. And so generally there's no cost to Lyon County for that. I will add that, if their project triggers an upgrade to a lift station or, some kind of clean water treatment facility or a wastewater treatment facility, generally that developer has to pay their share of that upgrade. We try and make sure that development pays for, or developers pay for development, and that it's not coming out of Lyon County taxpayer dollars, so. Septic tanks are only allowed if they're not within 400 feet of an existing sewer line. And you have to have a minimum of 1 acre lot. It can be, if it's served by a well, I should say. If it's not served by a well, it can go down to a 1/2 acre lot for septic. But you have to be on city water. And roads, similar to utilities, developers have to pay for all the roads in their development. Lyon County doesn't have a road building department. We have a road maintenance department. So we require that any road improvements, whether they be on site or say, they're using a major arterial road to get to the development and their development triggers a stoplight at that, then they would have to put that in. That's usually a condition of their or their tentative map or whatever the case may be, a conditional use permit. We also require that all roads are built to county standards, and we actually, through their site improvement permit, will actually go out and inspect that to make sure that they're being built properly so that they'll last. And then storm drainage. Storm drainage is a tricky one. We get a lot of questions on that as well. And essentially with storm drainage, the amount of runoff created on site and leaving the property must be the same before and after development. That's state law. It's also in our drainage guidelines. So typically what happens is if developers are going to have to build detention basins to account for the water that's not soaking into the ground because of roof space or parking lots, that type of thing. But they're allowed to have the same amount of water leave before and after. Discharge across property lines. So surface drainage from any developed area shall not cross any property line except by way of natural water course, major drainage facility, approved drainage system with all public storm drain easement, or permanent surface drainage easements. So basically you can't alter the way that water flows. So if water entered a property here and exited a property here after the development, that still has to happen in those locations. And it has to be in the same amounts. It can't be more. With that, I realize I ran through that pretty quick. I know we were kind of running behind. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has on different planning items, but that's just a very quick overview.
The property developers are responsible for building the initial roads
Mhm.
to the standards. That is who maintains it.
Lyon County, well, so it can depend. If it's within an HOA where they've got an agreement to maintain the roads, then the HOA would maintain the road. And there are examples of that in Lyon County. If it is not in an HOA, and there was no agreement to maintain it, then Lyon County would.
People that, Ralph and I on the planning commission, we rely heavily on planning department. Give us good information. And I'll tell you, some of the packages we get. Incredible, they get that much work on the period of time they have to do it. And I'm told my package is a lot smaller. For the commission.
Yeah.
You do a great job.
Now, there's a lot of work that goes into any project before it happens, before the public sees it. There's just a lot of background there. So, thank you.
I hate to go back to the road, but I mean, just out of curiosity, what happens when there's a termination of like, I'm down there on 6th.
Mhm.
So what kind of happens when it's okay with from dirt to asphalt? That just the county decides that, and then it would be the road maintenance department that decides to upgrade it, or how does that work?
So that's one way that could happen. So it would actually be up to the Board of County Commissioners on that. I'll tell you, in general, the county's not converting a lot of dirt roads to paved roads.
I'm extremely curious.
Yeah.
There's it's like a place up by Fernley, I go shoot, and there's a area out there, there's dirt, and then suddenly there's asphalt, they probably have an HOA out there. I guess.
So, yeah, so generally how that'll work is if somebody comes in with a project, right, and I'm gonna build a subdivision, and it's gonna add, so much traffic to that subdivision. Then we will require them at that point to upgrade not only the roads within the subdivision, but the roads leading to the subdivision.
It's like, it's on the southern side of the.
Yeah. Yeah, so I couldn't tell you in Fernley, but yeah. Cause the city of Fernley would be responsible for all their own, but,
Probably same rule.
oh, yeah.
Jim.
In general, they're gonna do the same thing. Anything else? Yes, sir.
So, on your zoning, a lot of people come into the advisory boards with their project.
Mm-hmm.
And they try to do the master plan and the zoning according to that project. And I wanted you to kind of talk about the fact that they're not thinking of, that they might use that project as something, but you're actually zoning a classification.
That's a good point.
Not a project.
Yeah, so when somebody does a zone change, right, and they say, I'm gonna build XYZ, right? One of the important things to look at with a zone change is, what are the other allowed uses within that zone? That zoning district, because the Board of County Commissioners cannot put conditions on a zone change. And so you can't say, we'll change the zoning, but it has to be used for this. That's not how it works. Anything that's allowed in that zoning district could then be done at that point if it's approved. So that's something that's important to look at, and I appreciate you bringing that item up. When considering a zone changes, what else could potentially happen if that project falls through?
You brought up by mentioning the spot zoning on agricultural.
Mhm.
You could actually put in an industrial use that fits that agricultural.
Right.
A big farmland, but now that you've rezoned it for agriculture, for industrial, now they can change it into a bottling plant or something else. That isn't. That's why it should be so hard.
Yeah, I mean, all of that stuff is scrutinized pretty heavily before it's approved. I mean, before, like I said, before the board even gets it, if somebody is gonna insist on taking it to the board with a recommendation of denial, they have that right. But
I was just going by that advisory board, they look at a project.
yeah,
I think, well, yeah, that fits, it makes sense.
yeah,
Why not?
yeah. Our zoning districts are fairly broad in some cases, so that can certainly be an issue. But it can also mean that, you're doing fewer zone changes as well. So more projects are gonna fall within their existing zoning, unless they're trying to do something on a residential lot that's not residential, and we run into that.
Can you step back to the slide where you had a couple of something?
Sure. Okay.
You don't have a copy of this.
No, I didn't print it for you, sorry. I should have, but I didn't. We can send it to you though. Yeah.
I think also, a lot of things the county has no control over,
Mm-hmm.
the highways is one of them.
Yeah.
And people, egress, highways, stuff, aspect, that change things. Zero. It's way in that stuff. They've done the traffic studies too, so you can't question the traffic studies. People, that kind of stuff. People think we're just.
Yeah, we try really hard to work with NDOT, who has the jurisdiction on all of our highways. And I've been in, I don't know how many meetings this year already with NDOT regarding different highway issues. And you're absolutely right. The county cannot tell them you will do this or you will do that. That is just not how it works with the Department of Transportation. they do listen to us on, some suggestions, but, just like we have findings, they do as well, right? Or they have what they call warrants, and so if a project doesn't meet the warrants, which is basically the findings, then they're not going to approve it either, so, yeah, I get that, a lot of the community, we'll hear questions or concerns about, traffic on the highway or something, but that's not within the county's jurisdiction, and it's not a reason for the county to turn down a project. Yes, sir.
If the local advisory board. Well, we had one that happened here where they had a business that opened out on the highway, they also had definitely. And after public input, the recommendation from the county was to Nevada. So it does work.
Yeah.
Because we have recommendations that we can send forward and they shut off the entrance because they can always remove the entrance if there's other entrance.
Yeah,
So it's real important that we know that. In the local advisory.
absolutely. Any other final questions? All right. Well, I want to thank everyone today for attending the meeting. I know we went a little bit over. I do apologize for that, but I think this information is really important for all the board members to hear. So we can be making really good decisions out there. So with that, we will close the meeting. Thanks, everyone.